agenda. Okay. So today's agenda is on today's dialogue is on the agenda of evaluating sustainable development goals. The UN 75 marks the 75th anniversary of United Nations and is an initiative to advocate and amplify the 2030 agenda of sustainable development goals. We will deliberate on climate change, sustainability, and on safeguarding human health in reference to the current world situation. With the objective in hand, I would like to invite Dean Sushant School of Art and Architecture to give a welcome note. Dr. Vibhuti Sachdeva is an architect with a PhD in architectural. Dr. Vibhuti Sachdeva is an architect with a PhD in architectural theory from University of London. She has worked as a conservation consultant and designer. She has taught at the University of Sussex and worked extensively on the city of Jaipur, focusing on its planning, architecture, and craft traditions. She is author of 4 books and several articles on traditional knowledge systems, Indian cities, and Indian modernities. She is currently working on devising an integral approach to learning and developing a research ecosystem for the creative fields of architecture, planning, and design. We welcome Dr. Vibhuti for the welcome speech. Hello.
A very warm welcome to everybody, and welcome to this gathering with some of you, all of you, eminent people in the fields, to discuss sustainable development goals and give it a critical dimension. I think that is what is going to be the overarching agenda. So I'm just going to read firstly quickly the goals of the dialogue, which have been, of course, circulated and well known, but in a way to kind of revisit what are the goals, because if you're going to have sustainable development goals, we need to know where we are kicking, where the goal post is, or is it a moving post? So to provide a platform for government officers, experts, professors, and students to develop and engage in participatory development of the world. That's the key word. To conduct UN75 survey among students for their voices to be heard. And I strongly believe that, there is a lack of the voice of the youth in many discussions that we've had during the pandemic. One doesn't hear student voices in the forefront, and that needs to be addressed very proactively. To enable participants to consciously think about a positive impact on the society. That's again a very subjective statement. What might be positive to one cluster of community may have a negative impact on the neighboring community. So what is in fact a positive impact? To empower participants to become cognizant about sustainable development and develop a conscious attitude towards designing of spaces of habitation which is in coexistence with the environment. And nobody can disagree with any of the goals, of course. You have to coexist. But what is this nature of relationship that we want to establish, we want to forge in the name of coexistence? Where are we ready, prepared to give up the hierarchies, to give up the power positions that are very much at play with any of our design decisions? So what is this nature of coexistence needs some thought. Inspire students to think of innovative ideas for development by taking into account digital innovation and social developmental solutions. The wave of digitization that has been exacerbated, got speeded up because of the pandemic, is gradually taking over most of our lives, and we are now at a threshold of almost losing sight of us as human beings vis-a-vis us as walking data? And, are there positions of resistance in that regard, where, there is a, human quality which cannot be datafied, must be protected and guarded against this rapid datafication of all human qualities. To empower the students to share their vision and collaborate with people within and beyond the industry. And that is also, again, a very, very important point, because what has happened in the recent past, that the interaction of the student body with the communities has lessened. And the students need to go out much more into the community and work. And whether the creative disciplines of planning, design, and architecture could have in their curriculum, in their training, a module of community service that is still very alive to some extent in the medical profession, and whether architects and designers need to do along with internship a community service module where they go out in the community and help people, whether it's redesign their living habitat, sort out some of the issues in the I hate to use the word slum, but for want of a better word. And there are so many design issues around in our communities that could, be helped with this kind of student participation, and so much learning would happen as well. So to close these pointers, I would also I think that the discussion will be about revisiting the sustainable development goals to see what has been left out, and to reflect on why have certain things been left out, and whose voice is it? When the sustainable goals are being projected, can you hear the voice? Who is it? A hierarchical voice? Is it do we need to decolonize the sustainable development goals? That also we need to reflect on a little bit more, and also to recalibrate our own position, bearing in mind that these are not, so to speak, God-given goals. These are created by us, for us, to facilitate us. And in that regard, we need to then think, who are we as people of this country, of this nation? Who are we as citizens? And do these goals actually align with the people we are and our hopes and aspirations? And I think to quickly then come to my last point, that we need to adopt certain kind of new thinking that has been facilitated by this very, very much required pause that was put on us, not through choice. And this new thinking perhaps nudges us to move from ideas of permanence to impermanence, that nothing is permanent. And so whether we need to look at anything we create physically should necessarily go through the cycles of creation, preservation, and dissolution. And what happens when things dissolve and perish and need to be cleaned up? What is the debris that is left over? So, and also to sort of think whether, we need to build less and preserve more. We built enough. Do we need to kind of really see what our roles as architects, designers, and planners is? Whether we need to move from the idea of curing to caring. And, everything, does not necessarily have to be symptom-based. And we could actually formulate new communities which are care ecosystems, where there are multiplicity of occupations, of cultures, where you could look after each other within a given resource system, within a care ecosystem, and whether those things can be allowed to flourish through policies, through those kind of goals. whether we need to move from the idea of competing to collaborating. This is an old idea, but whether we need to be more proactive in forging ahead. The idea of competing as an outdated idea that actually kills a lot of hopes, kills a lot of aspirations. More importantly, it kills creativity. Whether it's in our exam system, whether it's in our other areas of life where, creative skills are pitted against each other to compete so unfairly that, a lot is lost in that model of the winner and the loser. We need to kind of really identify whether, we can make space for every human being as an asset to this earth, that nobody is redundant and nobody is a failure, nobody is a loser. And to kind of really build trust among people in that way, because competition is something that destroys trust. And trust is very important for any policy, planning policy, design policy, or architectural design to flourish. If a community doesn't have trust, which is actually the cement that binds people, then there is not much hope that the policies will be implemented in the way they are meant to be. So that we need to kind of really ponder on whether we need to look at the idea of leadership and move it to the idea of people as thread bearers, not as leaders who kind of pull crowds, but thread bearers who hold the past and are actually temporary guardians of what the past has given us and are responsible to take it to the future. So you're basically imagining people who are in responsible positions to imagine themselves as sutradhars, as thread bearers who will take the past and in a responsible way present it to the future generation. Whether we need to kind of go from the idea of adding to the world to shedding, making it lighter, making things lighter, making things less weighty and more kind of with less baggage. And to my last point, we are in a fasting season, and I think that teaches us a lot. Whether we need to move from the idea of consumption to fasting. And fasting also, in a way, cleanses our soul and cleanses our body, cleanses our ideas, and it's a very important exercise. And whether how we could actually translate that idea of fasting into design, into planning, into the creative fields is something that we could ponder on. So I will leave the stage, so to speak, to my very able and eminent friends, and have a very productive and joyful session. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for that wonderful, warm welcome speech. It definitely gave us a lot to think about. Our next speaker is Dr. Divya Dutt, who will be discussing evaluation of sustainable development goals. Dr. Divya Dutt is responsible for developing and managing UNEP's programmatic portfolio in India. She has a doctorate in environmental economics and over 20 years of experience in applied policy research on environmental issues spanning diverse sectors. Before she joined UNEP, she was a senior fellow and director of Integrated Policy Analysis Program at the Energy and Resource Institute, New Delhi. I welcome Dr. Divya to take over the stage.
Thank you, Neha. Can you all hear me? Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Neha. And thank you very much, Dr. Sachdeva, for setting the context so beautifully. Thank you also for organizing this event and for inviting me to speak on this very important issue of evaluating where we stand with respect to the Sustainable Development Goals, to which we all as nations signed up to in 2015. And I think we need to look at the SDGs and understand their importance more than ever before in the current situation that all of us are facing. I was asked to speak on evaluating the SDGs. So I took a quick look at the 2020 Sdg Progress Report, which the UN brings out. It sort of brings out an annual report on where we are on the SDGs. And I have to say that it's not very encouraging. It draws on the latest data and it shows that there is continued imbalance and unevenness of progress. And there are many areas where significant improvement is still required. So if we look at the situation up to the end of 2019, we find that while progress continued to be made in some of the areas, for instance, global poverty, we understand, continued to decline, maternal and child mortality rates were reduced, and more people had gained access to electricity. But in other areas, in several other areas, however, progress had either stalled or had even been reversed. The number of people suffering from hunger, for instance, was on the rise. Climate change was occurring at a much faster rate than anticipated, and inequality continued to increase both within and among countries. And I think the COVID pandemic has set us back even where some progress was being made, especially when it comes to poverty, as it has pushed back millions into extreme poverty and hunger. Even before the pandemic, as a matter of fact, it was projected that the global target of ending poverty by 2030 would be missed. But the pandemic has actually put years of progress at risk. And I think for the first time they're saying in about 30 years, human development progress is expected to actually reverse. So we're actually now regressing in some sense on many of the SDGs. But I thought I will focus my address on things from the perspective of UNEP, from an environmental perspective. And I will try and give you a global picture to put things in perspective as you discuss more specific issues related to design and architecture during the rest of the event. At UNEP, we seek to highlight and bring attention to three accelerating planetary crises: climate change, nature loss, and pollution. And I think the pandemic has highlighted all too well that we have barely made a difference when it comes to these three issues. Let's start with the loss of nature. We are currently losing biodiversity at an unprecedented rate. About 1 million species already face extinction. And many of these within decades, unless action is taken immediately to reduce the intensity of some of the drivers of biodiversity loss. And I don't know how many of you have been following this, I'm sort of the students here, but the loss of biodiversity is actually one of the main drivers of the COVID-19. COVID-19, as you would know, is a zoonotic disease transmitted from animals to humans. Human expansion into wild spaces and the increasing exploitation of species is bringing us in closer contact with animals and the diseases that they harbor. In fact, COVID-19 is only the latest zoonotic disease. It is estimated there is a study by UNEP, which is available online. It is estimated that 60% of all known infectious diseases and 75% of all emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. So think Ebola, think SARS, HIV, to name a few. These are, of course, past us, but as I said, looking forward, 75% of all infectious diseases are going to come from animals. So this is something that we really need to keep in mind. We are not only worsening the risks of pandemics by cutting into nature, but this is not the only impact. We're actually, the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem integrity will undermine efforts on 80% of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this means slower progress on poverty, on hunger, health, water, climate, cities, a range of issues. So I think the important thing for us to remember is that often we think of biodiversity as something which is only for aesthetic pleasure, when we go to national parks. But biodiversity is something which is deeply connected with our survival in ways that we don't even understand. So it's absolutely essential for us to be cognizant of the impact of our development patterns on other species. And I think this is something that the pandemic has taught us very, very clearly. If I turn to the issue of pollution and waste, the obvious issue to talk about is air pollution. Air pollution is the world's single largest environmental health risk. Data from WHO tells us, and we all read the statistics so many times that I think we've sort of, we've stopped registering it, that 9 out of 10 people today are breathing air which contains high levels of pollutants. That 7 million people die every year from exposure to polluted air. And those of us in Delhi, we only need to look out of our window today, actually not even out of the window, even inside our rooms now, we can see, we can smell, we can taste actually the level and the dangers of air pollution. And then there is waste. There are growing piles and mountains of waste across our cities, even in rural areas, as a matter of fact. And we know what this is doing to the health of humans, this is doing to the health of other species, including marine species. And again, the link between various kinds of pollution is health, and health is something that we should start taking very, very seriously now. Finally, the third crisis, that of climate change. Again, the impacts are all too evident around us. This year alone, we have seen forest fires, extreme heat waves, floods, droughts all over the world. In India alone, and in this year alone, we have seen a series of crises. The northwest and central India have suffered severe heat waves. We've seen swarms of desert locusts, which have destroyed 50,000 hectares of cropland. Super cyclone Amphan, which has battered the eastern coast. And the loss due to this cyclone was estimated in the range of $13 billion US. And again, floods ravaged some parts of the country. Science is telling us every fraction of additional warming beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius relative to pre-industrial levels will result in increasingly severe and expensive impacts. And you would know perhaps that temperatures have already increased about 1.1 degree with respect to the pre-industrial levels. And that's the reason we are seeing the kinds of impacts that we are all around the world. Each year, UNEP brings out what is called the Emissions Gap Report, which looks at the expected size of the gap in 2030 and the progress that countries are making in closing it. The latest report is showing us that on current unconditional commitments that countries have made, temperatures can be expected to rise to 3.2 degrees Celsius this century. So as against 1.5, as against 2, we are actually headed to more than 3.2 degrees Celsius. We cannot even imagine the kinds of impacts that this temperature rise is going to have. If we look at what the temperature difference between what they say between the ice age and current temperatures, it's only about 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. So you may think, those of us living in India may think, what's a couple of degrees? We are used to this kind of temperature, but this can be profound in terms of what it does to the ecosystems. And when we talk about 3.2 or 1.5, we're only talking about average global temperatures. In some parts of the world, we've actually already crossed 1.5 degrees Celsius. And every day that we delay, the steeper and more difficult and more costly the cuts are going to become. To give you an idea, 10 years ago, if countries had acted on the science that was available to us already, governments would have needed to reduce emissions only by about 3.5% every year. Today, we need to reduce emissions by close to 8% every year, and even the most ambitious national climate action plans are falling short of this. If we wait any longer, we will need to cut emissions by about 16% every year, which will make the 1.5 degree target almost impossible. So the point that I'm trying to make is that we have a very small window now to act. And unless new and enhanced targets are agreed to and implemented, and the implementation of existing action is accelerated, exceeding the 1.5 degree goal can no longer be avoided. And achieving the well below 2.5 degree temperature goal will become increasingly challenging. These three crises that I spoke about, climate, pollution, and loss of nature, are closely linked, and they are driven in large part by unsustainable production and consumption. And this is something that each one of us can actually think about at an individual level, at a professional level, and as a society. What is it that we can do when it comes to unsustainable consumption and production? Let me also add that none of this information is new. I'm sure in other discourses, in what we are reading in the newspapers now. All this is known to us. And I think the COVID pandemic, the suffering and the economic loss has brought this to center stage, and also the fact that we should be prepared to pay a very heavy cost for inaction and delay. And I think it's also opened up an opportunity, as Dr. Sachdeva mentioned, it's already opened up an opportunity for us to embed sustainability into economic recovery, and we must not miss this opportunity. New research, for example, is telling us that a series of measures to protect the natural world and ecosystem services will cost a mere 2% of the post-COVID-19 recovery bill, with huge co-benefits. So you see, all we need is to consciously think about these issues and embed sustainability in our recovery efforts. It's not going to cost us more. In fact, it's going to be a very small percentage of what we are anyway going to spend. And in the bargain, we may actually prevent and avoid a very expensive costs that we may have to bear if we move on a business as usual scenario. And I think it is opportune for me to recall the messages from the World Economic Forum earlier this year. There were studies by the World Economic Forum that found that around half of global GDP is dependent on nature and services. Now that's where we are deriving more than half of global GDP. And business leaders across the globe identified the top 5 global risks for the next 10 years as being environmental in nature. These included climate change, loss of nature, and pollution, which were high among these risks. So clearly, nature is economy and economy is nature. And this principle must be central as we build back from the pandemic and in general in our economic development principles. Let me not just paint a picture of gloom. There are positive developments around the world from which we can take heart. Recently, you may have read, I think only last week, Japan joined some other countries, including Republic of Korea, to commit zero net emissions by 2050 as part of global effort to slow down global warming and meet the goals of the Paris Agreement on climate change. These two countries actually join a growing number of major economies that are committing to sustainable, carbon neutral and a carbon resilient world by 2050. A few months back, China announced that it aims for its carbon emissions to peak before 2030 and then to become carbon neutral by 2060. The European Union has pledged to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 under its European Green Deal. And UK actually became the first country recently to sign into law its target of being bringing all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. There is also a lot of action that is happening at the subnational level and by non-state actors, by various industrial groups. In India, we have already seen several state governments, Ladakh, Sikkim, and there are other mainstream states like Bihar, which are talking about carbon neutral strategies. Clearly, there is some momentum, but what we need to do is to scale out these initiatives in a big way. And this really is the only way forward if we are to ensure a decent living for all of us. Let me just take very quickly the example of energy, because that is something which may be closer to all of you in your work. Energy needs are projected to grow by approximately 30% by 2040 due to growth, economic growth, urbanization, infrastructure growth, growing middle class, etc. If we look at space cooling alone is expected to triple by 2050. And this segment will consume as much electricity as India and China do today. So that is the amount of electricity and energy we are going to need for space cooling alone. The only way we can meet this demand without jeopardizing the future of the planet is to improve energy efficiency across the board with a major emphasis on cooling and heating, and by the rapid expansion of renewable electricity combined with an increase in the number of products and services that we can move to electricity in buildings, in transport, in industry, and so forth. So I would like to end by reiterating the gravity of the environmental crisis that we face, and also by adding that while human ingenuity and technology will hopefully help us out of this global pandemic, the impact of climate change or biodiversity loss, including future pandemics, may be well beyond our ability to respond. And I think we need to keep this in mind. We must be guided by science to do what we can at every possible level of intervention and do so before it becomes very late. I will end here. My apologies. I will have to leave shortly for another meeting. I would have really liked to stay for the rest of the panel discussion, but I hope that there will be other opportunities, and hopefully these will be face-to-face opportunities where we can get to meet and interact. So thank you very much once again for inviting me, and good luck for the rest of the event. Thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the very concerning but informative speech. So our next guest speaker is architect Chitra Vishwanath, Principal Architect and Managing Director at Biome Environment Solutions. She completed her Bachelor's of Architecture from CEPT University, Ahmedabad. She is the advisor to Kilkili and a coordinator for INCH, a Indo-Swiss Sustainability Education Initiative. She has designed and implemented hundreds of real estate developments, residences, institutions, and resorts, guided by ecological principles, integrating sound water, energy, and land use thinking into design. Welcome, architect Chitra Vishwanath.
Thank you, Neha, and thank you, Sushant School, Himanshu, Vibhuti, for inviting. I've been given the task of talking about the goal 12, which is reduction of eco-footprint with respect to production and reduction of goods and resources, and then efficient management of resources and of disposal and use, and equity of consumption. So these are really large, broad spectra. And I like the way Vibhuti brought it down to bringing it to the people, to the design people, our students. And how do they go about managing this and learning that through design, we can be vehicles of change and we can be vehicles to achieve these goals. So what I've done is to look at what's the land required per person with respect to their consumption. And here the consumption is very basic lifeline consumption. Next, so for water, for energy, next for food, next, and taking care of the waste. That's what we call humanure. We don't like to call it waste. Next, and also design to encourage biodiversity. It's what Divya said, nature is economy and economy nature. So I'm here. So what we did was that we prepared at Biome a set of principles which students can use, though this is with Bangalore based, so the rest other cities can work it out according to their data. Here there is human, but there is a data of weather and other data of nature. Okay, next please. So let's go for water. How much water does one need and what kind of water? If we can start looking at it more in granularly. Next. So there is water for drinking and cooking. Next. Bathing. Next. Just cleaning. Next. So what we see mostly is they say it's 150 liters per person, and this is where all the water goes. 55 liters for bathing, then flushing is one of the largest need, and then there's gardening. So how can we now see differently? Next. If we think differently, first starts with using less water for bathing and zero water for flushing and zero water for flushing alone, and lesser water for other uses, like why should you be washing the house, or how do you wash the utensils? Then it comes down to 62 liters. So where we have really reduced is the amount of water we use for bathing as well as for flushing. Next. And we also start looking at what kind of water. how clean should it be? So we have highlighted that cooking and drinking water has to be the cleanest. And we are spending energy for this cooking and drinking water to be clean, because the kind of water which comes to us is not clean enough, or we feel is not clean enough, so we do this. And then the rest of the water, which can be a little dusty but without chemical pollutants, can be 55 liters. So now we have also separated it further. Next. And how do we access this water? Usually we would like, and that's the best way, is through tap. We can think times about how lovely a well is, and we go and bring water, and we have a community space there now for humans, especially for women who need the water access. It has to come to the house. You can't go to a stand and buy the water, or water tankers coming. So we picked up, how about rains, which are happening, and which are happening a little more in the cities. Next. So we take the case of Bangalore. We have an area of 970 mm. We have started with the premise saying that we require only 40 square meters of land per person to be ecologically positive in the city, anywhere, in fact, in the world. So annual endowment in Bangalore is 970 mm. So we get 35,920 liters per person. Requirement is met by rains for the whole year. And there is extra, which can go to recharge. Next. Now we need the lifeline water for drinking and cooking, just 7 liters. So yearly requirement of clean water becomes 2,555 liters. It's easy to store that much water. So how much roof area is needed for this? Next. We just need 3 square meters. And we worked with other students who've been teaching, and this would work out in most of the cities in India. Very less roof area required for your drinking and cooking water needs. And we, next, Neha. Yeah. So we did a study of how many people in a house and how much roof area. And this was all the water required. And you notice that fresh water requirement becomes more when it's coming from outside than when it is when you have lesser roof area compared to how many people staying below. So this puts paid to the argument which we keep getting isn't tall buildings the future? But when you make tall buildings, especially residential, what you're doing is that you're being parasite. But you can work it out that you can get water for your needs from the very building. So here one issue is missing. This is calculated in terms of 150 liters per person per day. Needs to correct this. Next. Now we have to close the loop, our waste. So 1 square meter of roof area, for how many square meter do we need? Next. Next. The human waste, we close the 1 square meter is needed to grow 1 kg of paddy, which gives us 0.7 kg of rice, and 1 square meter of rice farm. Let's imagine a rice farm of 1 square meter can take 1 liter of urine. That is urea, which is very important. Nitrogen is an important fertilizer for growing rice. And humans produce about 1.1 liters of urine. I hope for some time they go out and use an office or something, but otherwise the amount you produce every day can be used to grow rice on your rooftop. So every square meters you could use your own, and the rice needs once in 30 days of application from the very first day to the to 3 times in its harvesting. Rice needs water and 3 months of the cycle from planting to harvesting, and you can use your own urine. So 30 square meters is what's required. Next. And then you can convert the fecal matter into soil. soil is another huge resource which is depleting, and especially soil with carbon content. We don't have it. India is losing it very fast and all over the world. And humans, we think we only produce waste. We are generators of good carbon content and good soil. Next. Energy. As Divya said, we have to ramp up the use of alternative energy. So let's just take only photovoltaics, and that requires, here are the numbers, that requires just 2 square meters. We've seen that 3 square meters for fresh water, 30 square meters for using up your waste, and you're converting the fecal matter into soil, and 2 square meters. We're coming to 35 square meters. Next. So this is the ideal requirement. In terms of roof area requirement is only 0.75. So if you increase it, you can use other equipments also. Like right now in Chennai, people are using a modified dehumidifier to collect drinking water from the air. So maybe that will require a little more roof area. So like what you're saying, 2 square meters per person. Next. And then you have a lot of space for biodiversity. And that's very important. Now we have now worked at our understood water, energy, use of waste, tube manure, how do we convert it and reuse our terrace? And these are all mostly happening on the terrace, and also biodiversity. But how do we build as designers? We have, as architects. Next. This is the terrace being shown with all the various ideas which we talked about till now. So let's go anti-clockwise. The first picture shows you about a tank on the terrace called Kaveri, where it's collecting clean water from the roof. And this is what's happening on our terrace and in our designs in most of our buildings, where we put in this water, which we collect from the clean roof and use it in the kitchen directly. The next picture is of harvesting the rice. The next one is of solar water heater, and then the solar photovoltaic. And the last picture on the right is how we treat the grey water, which we use for flushing as well as for the rice growing on the terrace. Next. Next. Next, please. Yeah. So this is the material consumption. Okay. So if now we have an area of 40 square meters, we will get 7 cubic meters of soil just by digging 1 meter down. We'll get 28 cubic meters of soil, which will allow for building 2 floors, and which will give you also soil for another unit which may not dig itself lower. So for building a building, let's say a habitat of 40 square meters, we require 7 cubic meter of soil, because if we build with earth. So if we dig just 1 meter down, and we get so much more to build ground plus 1 structure of our own, plus providing it to somebody else. So there is this collaboration happening of sharing of resources which are coming from your own land. Next. Next, Neha. This is the section. This is the basement here, which is what I'm using right now. I'm sitting here, which is 22 degrees centigrade throughout the year. Here we have gone down 1.5 meters below ground, and it's been used to build the whole structure, and it's been designed in such a way that it works with the diurnal variation of Bangalore's temperature. So in summers you use the lower spaces, and in winters and nights you use the mezzanines, and there's a terrace which is treating wastewater, growing rice, etc. Yeah. Next, please. So this is again the same set of homes where we studied how much of earth do we get? And this is how we came to the conclusion that we need for a 40 square meters, 7 cubic meters for construction. And you can notice that when the basements were larger amount of earth was available to use it for people who didn't have basements. And there was extra earth too. Next. But it doesn't end here. Our cities are growing and we still don't have a definitive FSI or FAR rules. We keep changing. So a road comes and we increase the amount of floors which can be built. So the older buildings are demolished. And where does the debris go? Next door, somewhere near a hole, which would be mostly lakes, which will be filled up so that they're again part of the real estate. Next. Next. So it's a quick example of a building which was demolished, which is the black and white picture, and how it was completely, all the material were reused to build. Next. So that's the building, how it was. It was about 85-year old. Next. All the materials at the site were separated and kept. And then the design was done in such a way, looking at its foundations were well foundation. So the circles on the drawing on the right shows the location of wells with different diameters. Next. And these wells, you see them all over the land right now, looks really pockmarked. So these wells were filled with the building debris. Next. And the great beam was put and built above. So the walls which were with lime mortar, the bricks, we were able to reuse it completely. And then we made earth blocks at the site and used them to build the rest of the walls. The stones which came from the foundation as well as certain walls and roofs in the old building were used for walls of the new building and also for the staircases. Next. That's how it looks now. It used the same footprint as earlier, but we have 2.5 homes with better light and ventilation. And nothing went out to the as debris. We also were able to reduce the cost of construction. Next. And can we see the building, the new buildings? So students will build new buildings, and it's a human right to have new buildings. So how do we see the new buildings itself as a resource for future, rather than again we redo or we get virgin materials? Next. So here's a building where each component of the building was designed in such a way that it can be reused, from foundation to the facade to the roofing and even the partition walls. So partition walls some of it will go back as compost. Next. So structure was designed in such a way that it can be totally removed and reused as components, or the whole column can be reused also. Next. And that's the building here. The walls here, what you see, are mostly of paper, the paper tubes. The floor is paver block, which has been placed on quarry dust. So you can remove the floor too, and there's no cement joints between them. So easy, and you can get it back. And quarry dust you can reuse. The roof is GI sheet, can be reused. This is the false ceiling to reduce the heat ingress is bamboo sheets. Next. That's the same building. The glass has been designed in such a way to allow for light, allow for air, and the facade, and also soft surfaces to feel. So through this kind of a presentation is the only way an architect can talk. So here we're trying to show you how much resource per person is needed and the ways to also look at designing for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for that very informative speech.
Thank you, Neha.
Our next speaker is architect Gaurav Shore. He is a SPA Delhi and NICMAR Pune alumnus. He has also been a founding member of the Griha rating system for more than a decade. Architect Shore is a zealous promoter of sustainability in India, both at academic and industry levels. He is a Griha trainer and visiting faculty at School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. Currently, he is supporting BEE, Government of India, in a country-wide capacity building for energy and conservation as a ECBC master trainer. Welcome, Architect Gaurav Shore.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thanks. Thanks, Gaurav. Thanks, Himanshu. Okay, I'm just going to put my screen on share. But return to event and click on Cream Share. Okay. Himanshu, can you run me through this? It doesn't give me the option of screen share. I need to add some sort of an extension.
There should be an option down at the bottom bar, share your screen.
Just a moment. I can't see it over here somehow.
On the sidebar.
Sometimes it's in the sidebar. Yeah, that's what Chitra is saying. So there's a sidebar, and there is a button called sharing options.
It's like a TV with mountains
the landscape.
And, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Landscape. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Share, and then if you press that, you will get to share screen. That should work.
Yes. Voila.
We can see your screen.
Okay, great. You can? Okay, great. Because all of you are hidden now. I can't see you. Okay. So just a moment. Let me just turn on the clock. Yeah. All right. So thank you very much for as usual, Chitra. It's an absolute privilege to hear you, and it's so good to see Divya and Vibhuti after so long. Himanshu, I'm so glad you guys are all safe and healthy. And I heard that Himanshu and Vibhuti are having to go to university, even though the students are not. So I hope you guys stay safe in your sojourns and your roles in the leadership that you provide. So thank you so much for having me here. I have a lot to cover, and I'm going to try and plow through this as fast as I can. So with a little bit of a background about the first and foremost, the disclaimer, nothing that I'm going to say is the truth. It is merely a point of view, and to accept it or not is your choice. Okay. About us, I am speaking from the perspective of Swaraj right now. We've been active since 2012. We are a non-profit organization primarily focused on training and awareness generation in urban and rural areas at local, regional, and international levels. Our larger vision is to transform minds and bring people home. So it was such a privilege listening to Vibhuti's keynote, opening note. It was absolutely fabulous because it was so synchronous with what it is that we are up to. So the three things that we are working on right now is to expose linguistic hegemony and reconnect local people to the power of local language culture, decouple from the so-called global development paradigm and reverse migratory trends by empowering local people to believe in them. In the process, reintroduce local people to their own cultural traditions as well as sustainable livelihoods, and to introduce young people, that is, students, teachers, faculty members as well, at the school level, to the concept of systems thinking via the interdependent framework that we work on, which is Bhasha Bhojan Bhesh Bhavan Bhajan. So without much further ado, there are three terms that I want to first introduce before I dive into the sustainable development. The first one is linguistic hegemony. You would have noticed that in our mission statement. Second one is the word global, and the third one is sustainable development. So let me first start by explaining what linguistic hegemony is. Very rightly, in terms of what Vibhuti had identified, there is a very established concept in linguistics where an alien culture imposes through language, so it's very subtle, its own concerns and ambitions on another culture that may or may not share those concerns at all. And because it's subtle, it's not in your face, it's not gross, the imposed culture slowly starts mouthing the same concerns that the dominant culture imposed on the subservient culture, and then starts considering that those problems are my problems as well. All right. Linguistic, again, as I'm saying, linguistic hegemony is a very, very vast field of research. Of course, mention goes primarily to Professor Noam Chomsky. He's also a founding father of modern linguistics, but he's done a lot of work on American hegemony and also on linguistic hegemony in general, right? So if you talk about anything, something as simple as, I would consider the biggest addiction that we have in the world today is the addiction to electricity. And I know that there are villages that we are working in, there are hamlets that my friends are working in where there is no electricity. The people are fairly well off in terms of growing their own food, being extremely sustainable, having very sustainable practices in terms of their livelihoods and lifestyles. Invariably, the places that don't have electricity have very strong social traditions. They have very strong social frameworks. The social interaction and cohesion is very obviously very strong in these places. Whereas if you go to any of the places that have electricity, for example, when we were working in the villages in Punjab, then the people say that the first breakdown in the village where people stopped communicating with each other happened when television came in to our lives. And the second breakdown that happened in the villages in Punjab when fathers and sons, they just used the male gender, stopped communicating with each other was when cell phones came into the village, both of which require electricity. And the second term that I wanted to address was the idea of global. Now, it's very, very ironic that the largest continent in the world is Asia, the second largest continent in the world is Africa, and globalization has absolutely nothing to do with the Asianization or Africanization of the world. Because these two continents have the most sustainability-related practices, cultures, traditions on the planet. And we're talking about globalization, which is an absolute hogwash. It's horse shit, to put it very bluntly. Now, what you must know is that the world as we know it today and all of its engines of creation, I'm talking about all of their engines of creation, work on one technology. Can any of you guess that one technology? Anyone amongst the panelists? You have to bear with me here. I can't see you guys. I'm going only on audio.
I think it's, as you said, audio, I think it's the communication.
Okay. Anyone else?
Digital?
I wish it was actually. Sorry?
Digital and communication.
Is it the digital technology?
Happened much later. Digital happened much later. As a matter of fact, digital also happens as a result of this technology. Let me give it to you. It's the motor.
Movement. Oh, yeah.
The motor. And the best part is the best part is that the motor has not evolved since the year 1890. But the fundamental driver, whether it's an automobile or an airplane or a factory or a production line that gets driven to contribute to the economy, gets driven by a motor. And the interesting part also is that the maximum efficiency of a motor, where the motor is actually designed And given that I am from the background of energy efficiency and energy auditing, I know that the optimum efficiency of a motor is at 50%. That means that the actual capacity of a motor, which is 100%, the system can never really work at 100% load. It works most efficiently at 50% loading. Which then brings you back to the initial issue, which is that the most efficient power plants, which also work on motors, equal 38% efficiency in India. So you're talking about 62% of the energy going absolutely waste. Now, when I talk about this, it sounds conceptual, but if I was to ask you, ladies and gentlemen, I have an investment proposition for you. I want you to invest every day of your lives, 100 rupees. You give it to me in the morning at 9 o'clock, and sharp 9 o'clock at night, I'm going to give you back 38 rupees. Now, your obvious question is going to be, what are you going to do with the 62 rupees? Well, I'm going to burn it. What do you have to do with the 62 rupees? You don't worry about the 62 rupees. I'm going to give you back 38 rupees on the dot, 9 o'clock sharp. I'm a man of my word. Will you accept this investment decision? Well, most people, without batting an eyelid or without consulting their economic advisors, say no. So my question is, then why do you pay your electricity bills? And why are you so invested in solar power, which works at 16% efficiency? We'll come to that. A PV plant, of course, works at 15% efficiency. Now, in the US, now this is very interesting because as soon as you say sustainable development goals, the thing that I am left with is the fact that there is US hegemony in the sustainable development goals as well. It's just very obvious to read through when you talk about concepts like zero hunger, zero poverty. They don't know what they're talking about. It's like nature created drought to balance populations that are overexploitative in any bioecological region. If there is an excess of any dominant species and nature can't support it, there is inherent drought. It's happened throughout history. If there is drought, then there is hunger. And if you let that hunger be, then nature is allowed to rejuvenate and it comes back to its initial balance. This is anthropology 101. It's not something that I need to explain very by going into nuanced sciences. But the interesting thing is that as soon as you talk about sustainable development goals and you talk about the USA, then the biggest industries in the USA that dominate the economy are healthcare, technology, construction, retail, and non-durable manufacturing. And this, I've taken this from Investopedia, which is a website that advises people on where to invest their money. Now, what is very interesting is that if you look at all five of these, healthcare, technology, construction, retail, and non-durable manufacturing means stuff that you are likely to toss away after a year to 3 years max. Okay, they're all interconnected. So if I have construction, I have more buildings, I have more isolation of people. I don't have joint families like we do in Asia. I break it up into the nuclear family format or into the individual format. Then I supply you with technology. The technology allows you to do what? Shop or just buy more things. And that technology then has an impact on what? On health, because you're not designed to live indoors. For example, the Lighting Research Center that has been doing research for ages on circadian rhythm and the fact that human beings are designed to live outdoors and designed to be exposed to the sun and so on and so forth, it takes a nosedive. And then naturally, you're talking about the number one investment. Very interesting. Number one investment domain in the US is healthcare. Wow, I thought healthcare was to keep people healthy. And I'm just echoing what Vibhuti started with. But it's phenomenal because if I have to maintain this as a good investment opportunity, I need to make sure that I keep treating people. And I need to make sure that a lot of people keep staying ill for that. And again, I'm not saying anything new. This was stuff that Mahatma Gandhi wrote 10 in the book Hind Swaraj. We are simply revoicing what happened then. Now, over here, I'm going to introduce you to the global energy flow Sankey diagram. Now, I want you to notice the bottom left corner and the bottom right corner. Bottom left corner says, this is University of Cambridge. It is an old chart, but I have the latest one as well, which is from the International Energy Agency, IEA. Let me show you this one because it's a little easier to understand. Bottom left corner, primary energy 475 exajoules. Bottom right corner, conversion loss 420 exajoules. We are talking about an 88.42% loss. And I don't know if you've noticed, immediately above the bottom left corner where it says primary energy 475 exajoules, it says renewables, which means including renewable energy, our energy conversion efficiency is 11 point whatever, 38%, 11.58%. What are we talking about? What do you mean by efficiency? What do you mean by efficient delivery of clean energy to the last mile, as it says in the Sustainable Development Goals? What do you mean by that? What part are you trying to address? The top, the bottom, the right top corner where it says useful energy 55 exajoules. So you want to make that 55 really efficient. Okay, yeah, I understand that. And believe me, guys, this is not something that I am only sharing with you. I have flashed this image in the faces of people who are at least national level leaders. They also didn't know that this is what we're talking about. They had no answer to this. Now let's look at modern architecture. This is very interesting, right? And look at the fact that I'm a ECPC master trainer, and we have, of course, Griha. And I'm very proud of the fact that Griha, one of Griha's highest rated buildings, was designed by Chitra, which is the Govardhan Eco Village. And in the classic style of Chitra, it was built in mud, taken from the site. Of course, now they're playing a different game on that site. But the initial architecture that was put in by Chitra. And it's very interesting that in this case, I know that Chitra and Sharad are trying to dissuade the people on that site to not build more because it's going beyond the carrying capacity of the site, which also incidentally Chitra works with her clients on. And I just hope that all architects do that. Now, this is a very simple case study. I want you to first look at, take a good look at the satellite images of cities like Bangalore. This is Bangalore. And then you've got Delhi, and then you've got Ahmedabad. It's lovely. We've got beautiful satellite views to highlight. This is Guwahati, very quickly headed in the same. So I'm going to show you a very quick back of the envelope calculation that I did with my students in third year of architecture. These days I do it every year. I did this for the first time 4 years back with the SPA students. And I was trying to explain to them the concept of carbon footprint for a green building. So what was very interesting is that we actually got this amazing looking graph, like left side is a business as usual building and right side is a green building. Oh my God, the emissions are so low. That's really phenomenal. 1,74,191 kilograms CO2 equivalent emissions and 94,712. That is just gorgeous. But then we started connecting it to other things. For example, we said, okay, let's look at how much CO2 can a large canopy tree absorb. And I mean a large canopy, not a small canopy. A large canopy tree can absorb 48 pounds per year. You can Google this, okay? You will find it. So roughly 22 kgs. What is the radius of a large canopy tree? Yep.
Gaurav, I'll have to cut in. We have 5 minutes for the presentation.
5 minutes more?
5 minutes more for the presentation.
For my presentation?
Yes.
Oh, it's almost coming to an end. My watch is showing me 1 minute 43 seconds. Don't worry, I've got an answer.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So what does a large canopy tree occupy in terms of area? 314 square meters if I was to assume a radius of 10 square meters, which is not true. A large canopy tree can go up to 15 meters radius. How many trees do we need to offset 94,712 kilograms? Roughly works out to about 4,000 trees. And that roughly works out to 334 acres. Now, what did I do this calculation for? I did it for a 150 square meter building. 150 square meters into 4 floors. Made out of cement, brick, and steel. That was a warning alarm. So if I take a green building where I replace it with fly ash bricks and I replace it with PVC window frames and I double the glazing from single to double and I put in insulation which is absolutely non-biodegradable into my walls, then I actually end up getting a carbon offset area of 334 acres of dense forest to offset the carbon emissions from a 150 square meter building. And this is a green building. Interesting. And if I add operational energy to that, because this was just embodied energy, then I get 1,042 acres of land to offset the carbon emissions. And then, of course, there's the aspect of air conditioning, which Divya so vehemently said that we will, air condition. Well, this is air conditioning for you, ladies and gentlemen. And you need to know that when the indoor set point temperature is 22 degrees Celsius, then the average condenser coil temperature can be 75 degrees Celsius. Because the outdoor temperature is 55 degrees Celsius in urban areas. We have monitored this ourselves. This is theory. This is when we study HVAC, and I've done a lot of that because I also consult as an HVAC engineer. Then I know that if the outdoor temperature is assumed to be 35 degrees Celsius, then the average condenser coil temperature is 50 degrees Celsius. But that never happens because the outdoor temperature is not 35. Outdoor temperature is 35 in Bangalore. It's not 35 in Delhi. And the evaporator, the condenser coil temperature has to be higher than the ambient temperature by at least 10 to 15 degrees to be able to throw heat out into an already hot atmosphere. And then we are saying that no, the world has to air condition. Anyways, this is a classic case study that I found during the lockdown. How renewable energy is not renewable because it relies on quartz. 98% purity quartz comes from mining. It relies on 98% purity coal, which comes only from the Carajon mines, which are in Brazil. No wonder there that the forest got gutted, because the forest got gutted in the exact same area where the mines exist. Wow, pure coincidence, I'm guessing. And after this entire process, I get only 16% of silicon. And that 16% of silicon is 99.99% pure, which doesn't allow me to make a solar photovoltaic panel with it, because I need to go for the Cholarski process after this, or the Siemens process, which then allows me to get 99.9999%, that's 4 nines after the decimal, which only allows for polysilicon. And then if I want monosilicon, I need to go for higher purity, up to 9 nines after the decimal. And all that requires a huge amount of energy. Let me show you how much. These are the factories that you need to set up to manufacture photovoltaics. I don't think many of us are aware of this. This is the Carajon mines in Brazil. Again, yeah, whatever. This is Wacker Polymers. So what you eventually realize is that it takes up to 7 tons of input material to manufacture 1 ton of metallurgical grade silicon. So there is no way that it's efficient at all, because you're back to the 88.42% loss. And the best part is that Wikipedia tells you this. So Wikipedia actually tells you that the highest concentration of CO2 emissions is, of course, coal and natural gas. But the third highest is solar photovoltaics, and the lowest one is hydroelectric. And this solar photovoltaic calculation of 46 does not take into account all the emissions that I was telling you about. I will not even get into water. There's a lot of the things that, so of course, with all due respect to what Chitra shared, what I'm showing you over here is the fact that India's water consumption already is 4 times the amount of water that we get by rain. It's Central Groundwater Board data. So if you look at the annual capacity of India to use its water reservoirs, and incidentally, India's only source of water replenishment is rainwater. And we are not even beginning to take cognizance of what Chitra is talking about at the city level. We need to implement what she's talking about at the city level. We are already doomed because we are extracting 4 times the amount of water that we get naturally. Close the loop. I won't get into all this. I just wanted to show you this one last case study. I don't know why I'm showing you a building, but anyway, architects, I guess. Building. This is one of the buildings that Adhiraj might know about. It's the Krishi Bhavan building, where we were the energy consultants, the architects for Studio Lotus. This building is now winning awards left, right, and center, World Architecture Forum, RIBA, so on and so forth. But what is interesting in this building is that this building is non-air conditioned. It is not air conditioned at all. And it took us 6 months to convince the local government that you can actually make a building cool, like what Chitra was right now talking about. I'm sitting in 22 degrees without air conditioning. 6 months. And the sad part is that right now, when Amrish went to the UK to make a presentation at the World Architecture Forum Award, we were putting together such simple values to explain to the Western people that human thermal comfort is adaptive. And the fact that human beings can actually stay comfortable at temperatures up to 34 degrees as well, as long as they are about 3 to 4 degrees less than core body temperature. For a lot of people, that was blasphemous. They were like, what are you talking about? That's impossible. And I realized that the local way in India needs to be popularized. It needs to be spoken about at an international platform, and platforms such as these can help enable that, perhaps, to tell not only the future generation, that is the students, but everybody across the world, that there is an Indian way, there is a tropical way of doing things, and it's different from the Western way. That's what I wanted to say. And very quickly, since this was about what we were talking about, I wanted to also highlight this. It's very interesting. So before I end, this is SDG 7. So first and foremost, I want all of you to know who are listening on this, that the Sustainable Development Goals are interlinked. You cannot look at a Sustainable Development Goal in isolation. Unfortunately, the whole world is looking at the goals in isolation. The first line of the Sustainable Development Goal says that they are interlinked. So if you look at any one of these, access to electricity, क्यों भैया जबरदस्ती क्यों है? अगर मेरे पास आज की डेट में opportunity है to make a building without electricity use, तो मैं वो क्यों नहीं कर सकता? उसमें मेरे को judgment क्यों face करना पड़ेगा? Access to clean fuels and technologies for cooking, तो मतलब क्यों clean fuel गोबर क्यों नहीं है? क्योंकि उससे लोग मरते हैं। नहीं, लोग नहीं मरते। आप जाके देखो गांव में जब चूल्हा बनता है, वो चूल्हा घर के बाहर बनता है, घर के अंदर नहीं बनता। और उनको विजडम है कि उसको कैसे यूज करना है ताकि उसका कंबस्टन क्लीन हो। रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी, वो तो आपको बता ही दिया मैंने, रिन्यूएबल है ही नहीं। एनर्जी एफिशिएंसी, वो तो मैंने आपको बता ही दिया, 55 एक्साजूल्स पे फोकस कर रहे हैं, बाकी जो 475 का जो वेस्टेज, 420 का वेस्टेज हो रहा है उस पर फोकस नहीं कर रहे हैं। एंड आउटलुक फॉर SDG 7 तो भैया हिमांशु सोच रहे हैं।
No, I'm
So
not.
mind blowing presentation.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, man. You guys are being fooled right now. All of us are being fooled into believing that we should be buying into the SDG, buying into this nonsense. This is hegemonistic, and we need to be speaking up. And I mean, inshallah, Vibhuti should actually be voicing the same concerns that she's saying at global platforms and telling them that this is just not it. This is not it. There is another way, and we know what the other way is, provided you're willing to listen. Sorry, I get a little passionate about it.
No, which is I think which is needed, and one has to link all these points very clearly and showcase that what we are doing perhaps is not the right way, or there has to be another way approach to address the gaps basically and bring in those into our practices. I think it's very relevant presentation that you made.
Yeah, and I also, I mean, I do realize that there's a pitfall here in the sense that I'm sorry for taking extra time, but like I've heard Vibhuti speak, I've heard Chitra speak, and what I realize is that we are this echo chamber. We need to get out of our own echo chamber and how do I get Chitra to speak at the World Economic Forum? How do I get Vibhuti to voice what she just said at a civil engineers forum or at a mechanical engineers forum? And get them to see that there is another way other than just force selling HVAC equipment to everybody, right? And oversizing it and double oversizing it so that they can make their cuts. And I'm sick of downsizing systems. I mean, there's a limit. I mean, grow a conscience, guys. Anyways, I can carry on about this, so I will shut up. Thank you.
Thanks, Gaurav, for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you, sir, for the very interesting presentation. Our next guest speaker is architect Ajit Kalyat. He's an associate professor at School of Art and Architecture, Sushant University. He's a human geographer with a PhD in human geography from Queen's University, Belfast, UK. He has a 5 years research experience as PhD student at Queen's University, Belfast, and 3 years as environment specialist and team leader at National Institute of Urban Affairs, India. His PhD project research on land as a critical ecological resource for sustainable cities was completed with the case study of Chennai, India. He completed his master's in urban and regional planning from School of Planning, CEPT University, Ahmedabad in 1999. His primary interest is in urban resilience, inclusion, pedagogical research, and data-driven urban governance. He has been teaching at Sushant since July 2016. Welcome, Dr. Kalyat.
Thank you, Neha. Hope I'm audible. Okay, thank you. So I am not making any presentation, but I'm going to share some of my perspectives. Himanshu forced me to learn a little more about the climate action and SDG goal 13, which I was not really, focusing my attention, because I focused all my attention on SDG 11 and thought, I can transform society, the world, by working on that. And Gaurav kind of reminded us, you can't do anything really by focusing on one goal. You really need to see the interconnections and create a coherent thinking. Yes, global goals. That's why they are global goals, because every part of the world, every society has to actually respond. So I'm going to talk through what I understand and what my perspective about this and India's preparation on climate action and to respond to goal 13. To put it in perspective, there are three goals, three targets which need to be addressed under goal 13. Strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related disasters. Integrate climate change, measuring climate change into policies and planning, build knowledge and capacity to meet climate change. So these three, 1, 2, 3 targets, and then target 13A and 13B is about implementing UNFCCC recommendations and then promote capacity building. Now, we as a country had looked at this issue in 2008, and the National Action Plan for Climate Change came in, was announced in June 2008 by the Prime Minister of that time, Dr. Manmohan Singh. From that, now we are in 2020. We had another interesting development in 2019, October 2019. Prime Minister of India announced India's leadership in establishing global coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. There is a connect between these two different actions. One, India was preparing, organizing its systems, thinking, establishing knowledge and building internal knowledge systems to respond to this this imminent issue. And then post Paris agreement, Government of India's leadership has, through Government of India's leadership, many initiatives have been taken up, and in 2019, this initiative, this is probably first of, apart from International Solar Alliance, this is the second one actually, where India is actually taking lead. Now, there are a lot of actions which have actually happened in between. The Smart Cities Mission were announced in 2013-14, and Smart Cities Mission actually had looked at how to respond to the INDC and later NDC, nationally determined commitments, and the blue-green infrastructure became one of the essential part of many of the smart city projects, which if one follows the smart city implementation, there are a lot of cities which actually started looking at having blue-green infrastructure projects in these cities and programs. And what we kind of needed to look at is when I was trying to understand the variation in performance of Indian states on goal 13, it was quite interesting to see the 4 different categories: achievers, frontrunners, performers, and aspirants. So the Niti Aayog SDG India Index has helped in contextualizing and also creating a performance metrics. And states and union territories have been kind of, their performance have been reviewed. And only Lakshadweep, according to 1920 index, only Lakshadweep has is shown as achiever. Of course, the complexities are less. It's a completely different space. So the entanglement with the mainland territory and in the human engagement is minimal. But we have interestingly 4 frontrunner states here. And these are Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Odisha, Telangana, and of course, Andaman and Nicobar is there. But let's take out this. I'll come to that in a minute. There are 10 states which have been identified as performers. For goal number 13 is the only one which I'm talking here. And there are 21 states which are aspirants, so less than 50%. The indicator value is being less than 50. So out of the major states, only these 4 actually have. And there is also an interesting pattern, spatial connect that you can see. It's Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Odisha. So these 4 states which are contiguous, for some reason, either their response has been very conscious, or the leadership has been strong, or there had been institutions and individuals who actually worked with the state government. Maybe there is greater engagement between the the scientific community and the governments. We don't know. That's something which is an essential part of, which should be an essential way of responding to this. So that's an interesting pattern I picked up. But the bad part, or the area to improve, is these 21 states which really need to kind of move out from aspirational to at least performing stage. So we can hope, and I think that's where a lot of energy will go in. And the way to go ahead, because I'm one of the reason why I'm here, I wanted to kind of use this platform to share my understanding and learning here, is that so there are 4 areas in which we have to kind of engage. Obviously, we are situated in the realm of pedagogy, because academic institution, higher education institution, we are in this realm of pedagogy. But whether we start at pedagogical level and then engage with policy, practice, and entrepreneurship, or we start at policy and then create ways and means to influence, impact the other areas, but certainly there needs to have a strong and purposeful engagement between these 4 different compartments. I think that is one area which we really need to address. And as an academic institution, as an institution which is not just an intermediary, but rather we are in the process of thinking. We are in the activity or purpose of engaging our brains and invoking critical thinking. So we actually are in a position to kind of influence community on one side. We are also able to inform and shape the policy thinking. We can also contribute to the industry and corporate sector because we train the talent, we harness talent, we train the talent and their critical thinking. We should be able to kind of influence. So the goal number 13, again, I'm coming to the interconnectedness. Goal number 13 cannot be seen, or the progress on goal number 13 cannot be achieved in isolation, because it's also related to what we do on other areas, especially a rapidly urbanizing urban area, which I believe the next speaker is actually going to focus on. But the urban India and urbanizing world and planet, a lot of our actions which are going to happen in future cities and human settlements will create impact, and which Divya also mentioned in the opening and the keynote address, that the number of zoonotic diseases, the number of epidemics and pandemics which have been appearing, and the future prospect of many such problems are going to increase if we do not carefully and consciously safeguard our built environment, if we do not establish norms, standards, and also establish rules and regulations to which can guide our future. So my final point here is that as an urban planner by training, with a background in social sciences, geography, and broader aspects of social science discourses, I do believe we need to create interdisciplinary discourses within every academic institution, and that's a point which Professor Vibhuti Sachdeva also has mentioned, that how do we bring these discourses into academic realm, and how do we, of course, amplify them using all national and international forums, which Gaurav also mentioned. Use these forums to inform the way of these discourses are shaping up, and obviously impact systems around. So I do not have further points. I think I try to engage on this issue of goal 13, and my understanding is that this is something which obviously is very critical for our country, because we are a tropical country. We have large areas of land which are still need to be properly utilized. So the biosocial systems that we have, and the advantage of the biosocial systems of this country like India, need to be understood before we are able to kind of organize our systems and create better value. So I'll stop here. Thank you, Himanshu. Thank you, Adhiraj, and thank you all the speakers who guided my thing.
Thank you, Dr. Kalyat. I just want to address one point here to our presenters as well as the attendees that Professor Kalyat is a member of Sushant School of Planning and Development, which started in 2018. I think Neha kind of got it incorrect, but just want to highlight that point. Thanks.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Kalyat. I would like to welcome our next speaker, architect Gaurav Khemka, Principal Architect, Urban Arc, Singapore. He studied architecture, urban design and planning at the University of California, Berkeley, and is a SSAA alumnus 1990 to 95. He has worked with reputed architects and urban design firms such as Charles Collier, Kelly Hill Architects, EDAW Incorporation, HOK Incorporation. He is a global young leader for the World Cities Summit and an active member of several professional organizations globally. He also founded ULI's Young Leader Group in Singapore. He has been a visiting critic at UC Berkeley and Delhi School of Planning and Architecture. Architect Gaurav continues to retain strong alliances with large global firms while being focused on urban arc to design and deliver high-quality design solutions in planning, architecture, and interior design. He has been featured in several leading international and local publications such as Surface, Wallpaper, Dwell, Inside Outside, Straits Times, Business Times, and Cubes. Welcome, Dr. Gaurav Khemka.
So first and foremost, thank you everyone for having me here. Vibhuti, it was a pleasure listening to you as always. And likewise, good to meet Chitra, Gaurav, Dr. Kalyat, and everyone else. So I might have a slightly different perspective from all of you because fortunately or unfortunately, I've been living outside of India for the last 20 plus years, 25 now almost. So there are different challenges, there are different things. And yes, as much as I agree with Gaurav in terms of kind of all kinds of cultural and linguistic hegemonies that prevail and how we've been subject to, what we always know, colonial kind of rules and otherwise, and that kind of post-colonial reality exists. Having said all of that, I'm going to just jump right into what I want to talk about, which is really, it is sustainable cities and communities with the kind of SDG goal, so-called goal of number 11. But really, the growth and future of cities, what makes them livable, sustainable, and resilient. So next slide. So I'm going to go slightly different in a way. I'm like, so okay, you guys know who I am. There were some errors in my, I have never taught at SPA, but more at SSAA in the recent past and at NUS. So I have my own practice. I'm honored to be here today. I'm not going to focus so much on the pandemic and how SDGs need to be reshaped from the pandemic. I think I'm going to take a position that we don't need to redesign or re-engineer our cities as a reaction to the current pandemic, but rather address the fundamentals still be relevant in a pandemic. This is not to disregard the immense loss of human lives or the impact of the global economy caused by this, what I call a pandemic, but still a blip in our larger human reality. I still believe that the fundamental nature of the human spirit shall prevail, and we need to design a world where human interaction is celebrated, not a post-apocalyptic world where human interaction is curtailed. So in that line, I'm going to kind of segue into a different direction and lay out some basics and then go on to some kind of a toolkit or a toolbox for what I believe is, in my opinion, some little kind of low-hanging fruit to address sustainable or make our cities more sustainable. Like Gaurav said, it's my opinion. None of it is the truth. You have to take it in your own stride as to what you think is right or it's 250 red dots, one blue one. Call this person a village idiot or whatever else. He's different from the rest. Next, he, she is different. Next slide. So here's a few more blue dots. So this is a town, 1,000 people now. There are 4 or 5 of these idiots or geniuses roaming around. Next. Suddenly the scales increase. We've got more people. Uh, this is not showing, but it's a historic moment. Go back to the last slide. Two blue people are meeting for the first time. And that kind of is what creates this energy of people and people engaging, the two village idiots or the two geniuses, and that exchange of information. Go to the next slide. And now it's a larger town. Several blue people reside. Some of the red dots are turning purple on these fringes. In other words, we are growing and evolving from a small village to a town to a city. And what it is in these cities is really about the people and the human engagement. Next slide. So from my viewpoint, it's really, this is what cities are about. Two people getting together, communicating, reinforcing, challenging and changing the red ones, starting revolutions, and creating ideas, innovating, creating jobs, creating wealth. Collective and inventive endeavors of humanity is what keeps our world ticking. This will continue, and we'll tame the pandemic, I think, using digital and medical science and hopefully changing our consumption patterns. Cities do not live by jobs and bread alone. Perhaps we're paying too much attention to the physical and economic aspects of the city and not enough to its mythical and its metaphysical attributes. For a city can be beautiful as a habitat, but fail to provide the ineffable quality of urbanity, which we call city. Next slide. Now, I mean, most of you are kind of, in this field over here. So this was a little more for the layperson, I would say, but I didn't know who the audience was exactly going to be. But we all know this. The number and size of cities is growing rapidly. As of 2020, there are 468 cities in the world with more than 1 million population. I won't go even into the range of the 500,000 to 1 million. That's another 700 cities. Obviously, most of the human race wants to live in cities. So that's an established fact. Next slide. So, but 2% of the Earth's surface is occupied by cities, while 56% of the world's population lives in cities. So that's a pretty staggering number, something to think about. And the numbers say it all. I think we are at a critical juncture which will impact the growth and sustainability of our race. I believe that the human race has evolved from hunter-gatherer through the agrarian and industrial revolutions to now what I think is the urban revolution. Urbanization has reached an unprecedented pace, and it is anticipated that 75% of humans will live in cities by 2050, if not earlier. So this century will be the century of the city. So it becomes even more important to find sustainable solutions for cities. And now, of course, we look at this slide, which is 33% of people will live in slums. So do we want that? At this rate, it's projected that 1.6 billion people will live in slums by 2030. Next slide. Something that everyone touched upon, Chitra, everyone else, we do know that building produce a lot of CO2 emissions. If we go at the current rate, will we continue to pump CO2 into the atmosphere? Yes, 75% of the world's CO2 emissions are produced by the cities. So we need to rethink not just the way we do architecture, but how we build, starting at the micro level, as much as Chitra has pointed out. And of course, there are challenges and restrictions abound in that. And of course, our consumption patterns and our tendering patterns and our construction economy has grown to do this and keep on repeating this. So where do we kind of come in to intervene? Does it happen do we go back to the basics, or do we say, hey, do we shape these in an iterative manner? That question still prevails, the answer to which I must say I don't have individually. And I think whether one can battle that at the larger level. Next slide. I had to throw in this slide. I mean, this is how some of the super rich are choosing to live in cities. This is a house for a single family that we all know belongs to Ambani. 3-story stolen, cost more than $1 billion in a relatively poor city. In Sao Paulo, the super rich live in these kind of highly secure gated mansions away from the city a little bit, and then they commute from home to work by helicopter. Bizarre reality. Next. At the cost of what? Will the gap between the poor and rich within this cities continue to widen in the emerging world? Well, ironically, it is this very gap that keeps labor cheaper and thus makes these cities more competitive globally. It also keeps the migrants from coming into cities and swelling the ranks. So this talks, Gaurav was talking about, taking people back home or kind of the reverse migration, which has happened due to COVID. So is there an opportunity there? And if so, how and what can be done? So, I mean, these are larger dimensions which are policy related. I don't think architects can solve this. We can obviously be part of the dialogue. So this form of social equity really needs careful and deliberate thought, management, and governance. I think. Do we think this growth in the urban poor is going to increase because of a pandemic like COVID? Yeah, I think it will. I mean, I think but we'd also see a drop due to unemployment and then a sharp increase when demand returns. As much as it's good that people are going back to the villages or to the my personal take is, I think people will come back again in droves into this when employment comes back or when we go back to normal. So what do we do? Is this an opportunity to calibrate the city again to create some place for social equity? Maybe it could be done with some of the real estate that kind of, this is just a thought, that becomes available, commercial real estate that's going to become available because there are going to be change in the patterns of how we use commercial real estate because we're going to work from home or different other places. So maybe that existing real estate can somehow be transformed into multiple mixed use or even create dormitories or places for other people to live. So recalibration of the existing built environment or the existing built inventory. Opportunities there in always. Next. So, I mean, we all know this. They're adding more than 40 people per minute to their populations. Mind-boggling. And this is all happening in Asia and Africa, as we know. Next. So, I think development necessitates management at a city level and conscious intervention by each citizen, and I think a lot of India has a good history of great architecture, but if I may say so, or in my opinion, I think we failed at planning and we failed at really crafting cities as of today. We have good examples of architecture, but we haven't been able to coalesce all the other disciplines to really create a city. And of course, a lot of it is because of the governmental policies in place or corruption and all of the above. But not to go into that, I think there are numerous factors that form a city. And for a city to function efficiently, almost all factors need to be given equitable attention. The cities like Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Johannesburg, they're all fast-growing cities in the developing world. They have their own challenges. However, all of them have one universal factor. They have a diversity and human spirit that is incomparable. And that's something to think about. And on a per capita basis, these developing world cities are far more sustainable than the developed and Western cities. Since they consume less, densities are higher, people walk, and so on. Now, why are we not learning and recalibrating these cities to suit this paradigm rather than taking our cues from the Western so-called sustainable city? But one thing to be considered is that these cities are heading towards a state of, maybe there is in a state of euphoria just before like imminent death in the wake of globalization, unprecedented development of characterless mass housing, and increased motorization. So, next slide, please. So, like I said, I mean, these cities are thriving. There's a human spirit. They're growing. They're fascinating to live in. There's a lot of stuff going on. But they're kind of disintegrating as an environment rapidly and unnecessarily. Because perhaps, I don't know, perhaps are we experiencing the last burst of energy? Like the spastic twitches before the end. Almost like when you put a frog into boiling water, it kind of feels like, oh, wow, this is so nice. And then before we boil it to death and eat it up. So I don't know. I mean, this is question mark for me and something to think about. I believe, yes, if we don't do something now and very soon. Next slide. So in the vein of that, I'm going to jump into like, is the city a ticking bomb or is it an opportunity? Can we sustain the city and yet make it an economic engine? I think we can. It just depends on what we want and how we reorder our. Next, please. So this is just a snapshot to show you how certain cities in the West are now becoming more sustainable, or they're taking away their freeways and roads and taking them down and creating more pedestrianized, mixed-use environments, whereas cities in the East are going the other way. I mean, if you look at Shanghai, very interesting. Shanghai, as late as 1990, people were commuting on bicycles and walking, and now it's a network of super roads. People say, wow, they've done so much, fantastic. It is fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I've been there. The infrastructure is fantastic, but is it overdone? Is it overbuilt? And the authorities are even considering banning cycles within city limits. Are we going backwards? Why? I mean, I just wonder sometimes. Next slide. Next slide, please. So, I mean, these are some basic things again, like we all love going to Europe and, Venice and Havana. We find them like really rich, nice cities. The human scale is right. But then when we're building new cities in places like Singapore and Shanghai, I mean, it's housing for the people, great. But what it costs to the city, faceless, compressed condominiums, mostly gated, no city life. What scale is this? When it's kind of saying, oh, ideal housing to 10,000 is an ideal community. No, it's not an ideal community. I think I'll go back to what Charles Correa taught me. I mean, housing for the people, low-rise, diverse, high density, connected to the city fabric, non-gated, easy to walk, or boat in the case of Venice to work. What about the human scale environment? Creating that density and getting the density right at a low-rise, rather than creating these towers and parks concept, which I call. Next. And these towers and park concept come at the cost of a lot of other things. I mean, public green space is not public green space. It's leftover development patches within sometimes the boundary of real estate development or otherwise. They're not public spaces or otherwise. They're like gated development. So this is a telling graphic. I worked on this with Rahul and at Rahul Mehrotra, and he's now at Harvard in the urban design dean. And we were talking about how New York, surprisingly, just because of Central Park, gives you 21.5 square meters per person. Delhi, of course, as we know, has got a lot of green pockets because of its traditional green pockets that have fortunately remained, like Lodi Gardens and other places. But if you look at Mumbai and Shanghai, oops. So do we want to go into which direction do we want to go into? And the open space becomes very critical. Next. Next slide, please. Thanks. So, I mean, on the left, you see lack of human scale environment, scaled human environments. We spoke about that. So we have cities where we can learn from the heritage, whether they're European, there's Indian cities examples as well for that. I mean, in terms of density, just that the infra did not cope up, or rather was not kept up. I mean, even cities like Varanasi and various other cities, actually very rich urban fabric, beautiful cities to walk in. I mean, the lanes of Varanasi are called Bhulbulaiya, whatever they're called, but there was a fantastic opportunity lost, a 5,000-year-old city, which could have been just if the people, the citizens, the government, and everyone worked in tandem, they could have been, I would say, modern day European cities, which we all love and want to go to. But instead, we seem to be going into this dimension of, with Gurgaon and everywhere else, of a Dubai or Singapore also to some degree, or Hong Kong or lack of human scale environment, tall buildings, car-centric, the above. Gurgaon was a lost opportunity, according to me. It just went that route of Dubai almost, in a way. Next. So, do we want to live, commute, and work like this? Next slide. That's the American model, as we know, which is being, or do we want to live, commute, and work like this? I mean, we have so many lessons to learn from global global examples. What we did originally in our cities, we used to do this in India. We used to do this in Asia, and somewhere along the line, we lost the way. Some of the cities are doing that again in Europe, in Latin America. How can we take cues from them and also use the brain power that exists in India to do that in a sustainable manner? I think there are all these answers are within all that we're speaking about. Next. Next, please. So this is just a kind of a brief toolbox. Next. So I love this Kierkegaard, which was a Danish philosopher, and it's so simple. I don't need to read it to you guys. You can read it, but I would say, in fact, just read it everyone yourself. And that's pretty much a summary of what I say is one of the most important aspects of being in a city. Walkability. Next. So I'm going to cover a few topics. Walkability, different forms of sustainable transport, building resilient cities. I'm not an expert at building resilient cities, but this is just a little bit that I'm working on with the Rockefeller Foundation recently. So I've kind of thrown this in there. It is important, especially in today's context of the pandemic. So this is a bit of a response to that. Where I say that dedicating resources for building a resilient city is very important. Establishing the challenges faced by the city and leveraging its strengths and weaknesses and addressing the weaknesses. Improving access to ICT infrastructure has become very important, especially in light of the pandemic, and has been proven to be very useful for a city in terms of even data collection and data analysis, which allows you to understand human movement and various other, the consumption and the city health. So I don't have a lot of data, but, Chitra had a lot of data. So did Gaurav. It was interesting to see that data is driving a lot of your research or your interventions. So how do we get that data, and how do we get that data into a repository for the city, which is accessible to all? And then advanced preparedness for foreseeable crisis and learning from the last crisis. I mean, I live in Singapore, and I would say that, on counts of resilience, it really helps future-proof cities, and Singapore has been very good. Access to ICT infra and data is just phenomenal. Of course, it's an abnormal situation, and it's an anomaly. Singapore is a city nation, and it has its own issues. But that aside, data access, government tech, it's allowed for an easy trace and track methodology to contain the pandemic. We're down to 0 cases for the last 4 days. We have 45 people now who are infected, or 65 people in Singapore. Just complete track and trace methodologies did that. Plus, they were prepared from the last pandemic, SARS. Health services were prepared for the pandemic. So they learned from the last crisis. So it's really about that in terms of resilience. Learn from the crisis, future-proof yourself, and then work with international organizations, other cities, not for establishing a list of best practices and peer-to-peer learning strategies. Start putting them into place. So this is just toolkits. These are just, so that's why I'm putting them in this form. Next. So building sustainable and creative transportation frameworks is very critical, I think. Cycles use, we know, 10% of road space, transport the same number of people to work as personal cars. It's a healthier alternative. Walking, cycling, goes back to density, goes back to an open space network, and public transport. And this is one of the lowest hanging fruits. I mean, if we can start cycling, and we don't have to complain that it's too hot or it's too cold. Look at Denmark, look at Copenhagen. It's bloody cold, but everybody is beginning to cycle there. Jan Gell, who I was working with briefly, said, we slowly started taking away parking from the city center. People didn't have a choice. They started cycling. So there were like these small interventions that were done. Take the parking out. Be bold. I mean, don't go. The authorities say, oh, we have to provide so many cars for so many people. Challenge it. Say why, and especially in the light of autonomous vehicles coming in and everything else, it'll change that paradigm. So we have to take back, take over these roads. Personally, I think I've started cycling a lot, and I think that's very important. Next. So back to public transport and sustainable, and then building bike-friendly public transport so you can go from point to point, because if you don't want to cycle all the way, and creating bike storage and parking solutions under existing infra, used infra, and pocket spaces. When there's bikes and pedestrians, it slows down traffic. It's actually better for our urban environment. Put in showers at work, maybe in coffee shops, maybe close to work. It's really about kind of creating a whole bike-related infra. This is my personal opinion, of course, because I love biking. And I lived in San Francisco for a while, so some of you might have been there or stayed there. Critical mass was started in San Francisco in 1992. They just claimed the entire city on a given day in the year. Fantastic. And not only has it increased awareness, and it has about 8 to 10% of its population cycling to work. It brings out creative and free expression for people as well, as you can see on the right. No car and naked. Critical mass started off in Budapest, Ciclovia, and Bogota. And it's proven to be extremely successful. Why can't we do it in our cities for a day or for even half a day? It creates activity. It creates a sense of community, and it reduces emissions. And in the long term, it introduces the idea of biking to work. So it's slowly kind of changing habits. This is something in Curitiba again. It's a poor city, but good governance over the last decade has transformed this city. The mayor happens to be an urban designer, so it helps. Jaime Lerner. Public transport, parks, clever policies have created a high quality of life. I loved this idea of his, which was kind of related to building these BRTs. Of course, this has been done in Delhi. It failed, unfortunately, a bit. But I don't think it was executed 100%. But more than that, the idea was that you get your garbage to one of these bus stops or whatever, and you get a free ticket. So because the city was facing so much problems in getting garbage trucks or picking out garbage from these favelas or slums. So I thought it was a masterstroke. You get your garbage out, you get a free ticket, so incentivized cleaning, so you don't have to spend money on it in that format, because you can't change the favelas overnight. So out of the box thinking like this is important for developing world cities. Next. Oh, we're still on. Oh, sorry, I'm on another slide. I should have had taken control of the sharing screen. Sorry. So this was the cycling one screen. Next, we can go. I've already covered this. Next. Yeah. So this was the one I was talking about in Curitiba, where they removed the garbage from the slum. No, go back, please. From the favela, and had to get garbage trucks in there and deposit in bins at dedicated centers and get a free BRT ticket. Genius, according to me. Next. Can we do something like this as a pilot in a city in India? Imagine 2 lanes for cars, 1 for electric vehicles and hybrids, 1 lane for segways and dog carts. Might be a hard stretch because in India no one drives in lanes. We could try. But these are of course kind of ideas, city which might be easier in Singapore to implement than in India. But nonetheless, it's about creating creative and healthy transport options and a whole range of them. Go back. So, Curitiba, Jaime Lerner, back, please. Can you go back? Yeah. they've created a nice little personalized vehicle called a Doc Doc. You can see how it can park between cars, or it's quite convenient to get to work in. Can we invest in stuff like that, especially in cities, instead of we're going from smaller to bigger cars because we're being driven by the automobile manufacturers from the West. They want us to buy bigger cars. That's what happened in the US. They went from smaller cars to bigger. A Honda Civic used to be a tiny car in the 80s, and a Honda Civic has become larger and larger and larger over the years. The Honda Accord as well. Every car. It's bizarre. So that need for space, consumption pattern, back to consumption pattern. And then, school bike bus. Can we have kids going to school on a bike bus in Holland? It's pretty cool. Provides workout, saves gas and environment. Of course, it's for a community or a neighborhood. It's not, you can't go 20 kilometers in it, but nonetheless. Next. So building human-centric cities is very important to creating a sense of community and sustainability. It's the scale. This is where architects can definitely intervene. I think designing to the lower human eye level of the city is important. Softening the edge of buildings where they make the city. Zero lot lines is very important. I've been realizing that all throughout. In Gurgaon, we went the other way. In places like Connaught Place earlier, we still didn't have zero lot lines, but at least the older part we did. And that's something which we missed out. The edge of the building and the way it interfaces with the city becomes so critical. Instead of building a tower in a park with a gated fence around it and walking on a pavement, we need to go back to this formula which has existed for years, and we just seem to have turned it on its head for whatever reason. Next. So, yeah, human scale, opportunities to, and then within urban furniture, within opportunities to sit, lean, and just stay in public spaces and create vibrant, lively cities. Opportunities to see and be seen. Man is man's greatest joy. This will endure, albeit constrained during a pandemic, but I think it's going to come back. Next.
Gaurav, you have two more minutes.
We can design for different kinds of climate as well. For open space, it's pity. Singapore used to have these 5-foot walkways and shop houses. I still have my office in one of these, and we walk everywhere for lunch and around, and it's so vibrant. But all the modern buildings, when you have to walk, it's hot. And then they've made air-conditioned connections between buildings. I don't know why, when these are just such brilliant spaces to walk in. They've done a modern response to climate. Clarke Quay, Singapore, that keeps the rain out, the large air-cooled fans and ETFE canopy is cool. It's a bit Disney-ish, but it has been an extremely successful creation of public space between buildings. Of course, in a very scaled environment. Cold climates, you can do blankets, hats, heaters, glass windscreens, and canopies to keep the weather at bay. But still still allow the public to enjoy the city. So these are things to kind of think of in animating and making our cities vibrant. Next. Claiming back disused infra, brownfields, all of the above. Sorry, this is not the updated slide, but anyway. I mean, it's really about building open space networks and, connecting all open spaces in a vehicle-free network and increasing access to these spaces. So it can start with disused infra. It can go on to, next, please. It can go on to, claiming back, creating microgreens by claiming back parking lots for green spaces. People, creative urban furniture, cafe extensions. I think the pictures speak for themselves. Next. Spaces below flyovers and infra in the city for art, green spaces, cinemas, cycle shelters, etc. I think there's a lot of underutilized leftover spaces in a city, and how can we claim these back into our open space framework, or even spaces that can be enjoyed by residents is something to think of. Next. Last but not least, I would say it's, how can we go beyond greening? So urban agriculture plus biophilic architecture. Can we go into urban farming, finding opportunities within buildings and cities to grow our food? Some headway is being made into this place right now. Still mostly greening and making it look visually nice, which costs a fair amount of money to put together. But how can we go to the next step and really growing our food in these? Look, skyscrapers are here to stay, and urban tall buildings and all. As much as I may not be a fan of them, they're here to stay. The economic engines that promote them are not going to go away. How do we now say, let's utilize that? Let's utilize that surface area, whether it's for some kind of water collection, which then kind of ties back into food production. Of the above is really about creating food security. Next. And this is missing a text, but anyway, it's kind. So yeah, I think one day this pandemic will also be over, and we're grateful for what we never felt before. And I think this is the time to change our habits, consumption patterns, and build resilient, equitable, and sustainable cities. One of the things that I've chosen to do personally, and I would encourage everyone over here, is low-hanging fruit. As much as these are big, broad, macro-level things, but that walking and cycling as much as you can. 2, become vegetarian. I think we just completely failed to understand the impact of how much land goes into producing even just 1 kilo of meat, and what that does to destroying our forests and everything else, and causing these kind of viruses to come into our framework. So last slide, please. Thank you. After this. And to sum it up, the future, I guess we'll continue to need more of the blue people to change our vision for the community, the city, and the world at large. And so remember my earlier slide about the formation and existence of cities? Well, we need to think out of the box like the blue people and work towards it, keep our cities sustainable. I think the city of today is not so different from the city of 200 years ago. The city of the future is not going to be a Blade Runner scenario, as we kind of see in these kind of post-apocalyptic movies, but I think this revolution has already begun in the rise of small, medium enterprises. These businesses are important generators of ideas and jobs. They bring more services and products, food and close to the consumers. The other revolution is definitely the use of wireless and virtual meetings. This will reduce our dependency on the live, work, commute, but we'll still continue to engage and interact with the city for various other needs. A lot of commercial real estate will become available for other functions. Perfect opportunity, like I mentioned earlier, to make CBD more mixed use, inserting other functions. The third is sustainability. We definitely have to be more engaged in this aspect, but start with low-hanging fruit, like I said. And make it more sustainable in tandem with all new architecture. As green, as sustainable, and try to keep on building upon this toolkit as a base and inserting it bit by bit, incrementally. We're not going to be able to make huge changes overnight, but incrementally. That's it. From now, I'll hand over to Adhiraj, who will be introduced, I'm sure. And but we kind of worked on this together, where I wanted to look at it at a macro level, and Adhiraj is going to jump more into a micro architectural insertion level. So next to Adhiraj.
Well, thank you so much, sir. Neha, can you just open my PPT?
Yeah, sure. So, thank you, Gaurav sir, for that very interesting presentation, and apologies for the information glitch. Our next speaker is architect Adhiraj Miglani, an SSAA alumnus 2012 to 17. He has worked with Lotus and has several accolades accolades for his thesis interpretation. Currently, he is working as an independent architect, and he'll be taking the next presentation. Welcome, Dr. Architect Adiraj.
Well, thank you so much, Neha. Hello, everyone. I'm Adhiraj Miglani, an alumni of Sushant 2012-2017 batch. And currently, I'm a design lead of Drake Holding India Private Limited, which is basically my father's company, which I'm taking forward to another vertical, which is architecture. So he's basically dealing in trading and all, and I would be opening another vertical, which is architecture. It's great to be back to my alma mater and address all of you. I'm the youngest, and I hope I can do justice to this topic, as well as to the dynamic panelists who are here with me. So basically, I'll be presenting the micro level of what Sir has said on the impact of communities and cities. Neha, next. So there are four very key elements to the Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is inclusivity, resilience, urban safety, and sustainability. Inclusivity is basically something which focuses on the problem of inequality that tends to be associated with urban economic system and infrastructure to varying degrees. The resiliency is the ability of crowded urban areas to plan for and respond to things like large-scale disasters. Urban safety can be correlated to poverty rates or inequalities, where the higher the instances of poverty, the less the safe area is. And lastly, the sustainability, which refers to good resource management and urges one to focus on renewable resources of energy. Next. I would like to state something which is very dear to me, and I always practice this throughout my college as well as my professional architecture as well. So it's a quote by Hans Meyer, who is a Swiss architect and the second director of the Bauhaus Design Studio in Germany, Design College, sorry. Each age demands its own form. It is our mission to give our new world a new shape with the means of today, which basically means as architects, designers, and planners, we need to respond to whatever context is prevalent in that time period or situation. Next. So coronavirus has inevitably shifted the perspectives of practicing architects. Is it so? Because this wouldn't be the first time that disease has led to a reimagining of the built environment. Previously, many trends in architecture and urbanism that we see today were derived from similar measures before to ensure health, hygiene, and comfort of urban residents. Our built environment has always exhibited the capacity to evolve after the crisis. But inevitably, design as a process requires one to evolve and respond to the context of this versatile world. Next. Now, I ask this question often to myself and as well as to my seniors and architects who are in this field, that how can we do this? How can the built environment community do this and take this forward, take the notion of the resilient cities forward? The answer, I think, lies in the environment around us. We need to take a step back at nature and look a step forward to advanced technology. But is technology the only way out and means of achieving a sustainable future? I think it should just be a facilitator, just like us as architects are and planners are all facilitators to the mere building. We are not the people, we are not the gods who are designing the building. We are just the collaborators. And when a bunch of collaborators come and design a building, that's the key. So the people are always the solution to our problems, and nature always finds a way to respond to it. Next. So according to me, I believe that there are four parameters that decides the narrative to this design process, which is disperse and segregate, multifunctional spaces, reclaiming the outdoors, and humans as the focal point. Next. So we come to the first point, which is disperse and segregate. This reimagining of the built environment calls for a nuanced shift, I think, We need to extend the mindset of ourselves from the foreclosures of the house. We have neglected the open spaces so far and have been retreating further and further within glass facades and artificially lit spaces, as we have already seen in Gurgaon. Traditionally, Indian homes had always been designed for human interaction. Courtyards in the middle of houses, verandas right on the street, so that you can see people who are coming by and then talking to them. The interaction was always constant within the house as well as the city and the beyond the house. So, but why has this happened? This has happened because of the intense urbanization created the need to go vertical. But in this lockdown, we have realized that balconies become a space for expression of anxiety, appreciation, and reaching out to the community. Next. Pandemic, I think, has allowed us to tune back into the neighborhood, which we had forgotten before. And nowadays, we need more common spaces that forge this bond even further. A space for rejuvenation. All the open spaces, the balconies, are a space where a person can just come out of his home and experience what the outdoor has to offer to him. Talk to people in the neighboring colonies by coming out in the balconies or coming out in the parks, in the open spaces. I think so. It should be a good idea to create a series of interconnected open and semi-open spaces such as threshold, verandas, courtyards, and gardens, which extend the idea of home from its limited definition of closed enclosure. We really need to get out the idea of the apartment, I believe. Next. So these are some examples which I took a snapshots of during the lockdown. So the right-hand side, the two right-hand side images that you are seeing are from India. The left-hand side image is from Berlin in Europe. So how did these open spaces and balconies became a sort of socio-political tool for human communication? As we all have experienced that there were multiple activities that we did in the lockdown from our balconies as a way of expressing ourselves. For example, the Thali Bajao movement, in which we all participated as a gesture to boost the morale of health workers. It became a place of joy, despair, and celebration. Next. The second point which I want to arrive on is the humans as the focal point. Nowadays, we are just building communities for cars, for housing societies, but we are not keeping the main focal point in our mind, which are humans. We have to tailor the design as per their needs now. So this has given a great opportunity to rearrange the peculiar hierarchy that we have as cars ruling over the roads and over the maze. We need to make the pedestrian, the cyclist, or the person on the public transport take center stage for a change, as Gaurav Shore rightly mentioned. We have all seen in this lockdown, I myself have started cycling with so many of my friends. The cyclists, they rule the roads now on Sundays, either on Saturdays. People are going, earlier we used to think that 30 kilometers is a lot to cycle. People are now going 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, they are cycling, and easily they are going from Central Delhi to Khan Market to Connaught Place. Why can't we have cycles on the roads now where cyclists rule the roads? Next, sorry. So I just want to, because I am a resident of Delhi, I have been living all my life in Delhi. So there are like 3 to 4 examples which I can take out from living over here, which is basically there's increasing evidence that outdoor spaces are less vulnerable to the spread of infection. So why can't we go outdoors? Why can't places like M Block, why can't places like Defense Colony, which have a central park in the center and markets on the periphery, that central park is absolutely a waste. Why can't we just create that as a piazzas? And making cities like Delhi already has a lack of public spaces. So basically that park will serve the purpose of people meandering through the park, enjoying the open air seating within the greens. The space inside could be made as makeshift restaurants, shops with lightweight canopies, which could help create shaded walkways. And in turn, open terraces can also double up as a food or beverage surfaces. Next. So coming to the third part is the multifunctional spaces, idea of a mini apartment within the apartment. As the people living within their households embrace a new way of living and working, the house needs to reflect that. In this new normal, which we are seeing right now, people are dividing, say, 3 at 4 days of their work in their homes. And this in turn will drive people to invest more in bigger and better looking energy efficient homes. Also, as companies realize in the future after the pandemic is over, because they are realizing that they are saving on huge amount of capital cost, which is a huge burden on their shoulders, they would further continue this process and in turn making the employees invest in homes and generating more profits. Next. A certain amount of claustrophobia, I think so, has set into our minds. We are done with air conditioning now. Hence, large stairwells, skylight passages will become very important. Anything that allows the sunlight to filter in and give a sense of openness would be something which all the human beings would be craving for now. Next. So this is the last point which I really want to stress upon, which is reclaiming the outdoor spaces. In our daily lives, we see example like taking breaks in offices and just having this notion of chai pe charcha, which has been there since 18th century, where a bunch of people come together, they discuss about politics, especially in offices. When we take breaks, we discuss about office politics, but it's a way of behaving. It's a human behavior where one tends to go out from the indoor environment to the outdoor environment and just relaxes their mind by having a cup of tea. So, but why did we shift to indoors from this point? It's just because of India's hot climate and had a very, very big role to play this shift. So street side eating spaces shifted to indoor restaurants, and one saw the rise of enclosed shopping malls, which we are seeing in each and every major city they are. The transitional shift was driven by the fact that indoor spaces could be regulated for comfort through acoustics, lighting, and temperature control. Next. So I think so it would just be a wasted opportunity if we don't use all our technological abilities to bring social activity outdoors in a more democratic and an accessible manner. Most open spaces in urban setting are underutilized since they are used only for a limited part of the day. So interchange of activities throughout the day is something that we would be envisioning in the future. As I just mentioned, the examples of makeshift restaurants or makeshift shops in the central piazzas. Maybe in the day it is like that, and in the night it becomes a concert. Then I am just taking this example, which a project that I worked on, which is a visitors center in Mehrangarh Fort in Jodhpur, for which Studio Lotus is the architect. I was part of the team as one of the project leads designing and winning this competition. Picture that we see over here is the one-to-one prototype, which is being done on the site right now. So it wasn't a building which Lotus was designing. It was a system that we were designing, a kit of parts which allows one to create a built structure and if required in the future can be disassembled and reshaped and put together again as per the different programmatic needs of the fort. As Chitra ma'am rightly said, in her project also she is making the projects which can be disassembled and can be done and made into a new thing in the near future. So I really think so. How we imagine the building cycle to be linear, it's basically a circular thing which we are now seeing. So just coming back to this Mehrangarh Fort example. So the engineering and the craft system which has been conceptualized, which correspond to sustainability through multiple lenses of cultural, social, and environmental impact. The design that accepts and celebrate context, making locally relevant choices that help sustain the economy and environment. Why I'm saying this is because the screen that you are seeing over here is from the local stone. The local stone over here is so hard that we could span up to 3.2 meters of this as a wall and a building material. And we made lattice screens all throughout these semi-open space which can shade the sun. not using any kind of solar energy, not using any kind of new adaptive ways of energy, just using our local heritage and sticking to the responsive design, the passive design methods which India already has, and taking them and reiterating them in this. So we have created something which was being done in the history as well, in the past as well. I'm sorry. Next. I would just like to end the whole slide on this note that nature has its own way of correcting itself. Pandemics will keep on coming and going. We as architects have to go beyond the adversities and provide radical solutions. I think so. We should just be energetic and not just be reactive to each and everything. We should just take charge. There are many persistent patterns of human behavior that need to be stopped. We need design that promotes a lifestyle of healthy choices, making both physical and mental wellness the norm and not an exception. We need design that accepts and celebrates context, making locally relevant choices and helps sustain the local economy and environment.
Thank you, Architect Miglani. I would like to thank all the speakers for sharing their views on evaluation of sustainable goals. Now we will move on to the next segment of the dialogue. I kindly invite everyone to join the panel discussions moderated by Architect Himanshu Sanghani, Associate Dean at SSAA. He has a B.Arch from IES College of Architecture, Mumbai, and has double master's degree in environmental architecture from India and environmental engineering and sustainable infrastructure from Sweden. He has worked as program and policy analyst and as an architect with international organizations. He joined Sushant School of Art and Architecture in 2012. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Neha. And thank you all the panelists and attendees for joining this session. I think it was really, really powerful and eye-opening presentation and discourse that happened today. And I just kept making notes and all the points that all the panelists really made. And I regret that we overshooted time due to technical errors and certain other issues, but I'll try to keep this very short but relevant so that we address and we highlight the key points. There was a reason why the panelists were sequenced in that order of Teen, then Divya and Chitra, Gaurav, because the whole idea was to go from micro to macro and then end with micro again to internalize the idea of what we should really look up to when such a situation arises of pandemic or health-related issues. And everything is related with the basic understanding of that education. So my first deliberation or first question would naturally go to Dean of SSA, where she really pointed out the key points of one involving youth and moving from curing to caring. So the first idea that comes out is that during this pandemic situation and the COVID situation has shown us this path of disruptive education, and UN has laid out the factors for disruptive education, which is customized learning, access to digital tools, integrating artificial intelligence, reinforcing digital skills, and encouraging critical thinking, which is so much in alignment with SSA. But while we have these key and important factors involved, we also see that this entire model is driven by technology and the access to technology. And with too much of technology, we have seen then students oftentimes lose their focus, and then there are pertaining health issues. So do you think that the SDG criteria, and one of the SDG is about well-being and mental health, should include this concept also and relook at that sustainable goal?
You mean the role of technology in
role of technology in yes
mental well-being?
Yes.
I think mental well-being and happiness is is of key importance. And I'm really heartened by the fact that it has now come out of the closet and being recognized as something that everybody goes through, that we all go through diurnals, we all go through ups and downs in our minds, and it is not sustainable to be constantly happy and upbeat all the time, because of course in Buddhism the phases of depression lead you proactively towards a spiritual path. And I find that very powerful, because unless you are, you recognize your lows and you recognize the importance of your lows, not treat it as a disease, not treat it as, something that you shouldn't be going through, but something very powerful in a way that you connect inwardly within yourself and you come out of it. That is what is important, that, we have to show our younger people and older people, everybody, how to kind of treat this as a phase that you go through and recognize the potential of going through lows and ways of coming out of it in a much more stronger way. So the role of going through these phases, how you approach it should change. And I think there is a huge there is a huge need to address so many of these things that are to do with the mindset. Plastic was so attractive to us in the 50s as a new material. Now we hate it when we put water into it. So you can actually turn around the perception of anything in your mind. And, as Adhiraj also said, we are feeling claustrophobic indoors. Remember, in the 1950s, sitting in an air-conditioned office was a mark of status. The fact that you will be cycling to work was looked down upon as some, God, this guy can't even afford a car. And now people who cycle are cool. So, there is so much we need to work with our minds to kind of alter the situation, alter the perception, and, see how we look at, and there is a kind of a philosophical idea why, phones have, which used to have a camera that you would take a selfie on. Now the camera can move out and you can look at reality in a different way through your mind. And I think those are the areas that are very subtle, very invisible, but those are the things that we need to bring into our curriculum as well. That, how to have a healthy teaching environment, how to have healthy co-creating environments where you recognize potential, where you don't stereotype people, where you don't categorize people, where there is a culture of sharing and caring, which is naturally embedded in the way we all learn together. And I think those things are really very important, and one step at a time, and we will get there. I mean, we will.
Yeah. Thanks. I think you raised a very pertinent and important point of involving well-being and mental health issues in the education, which by far is missing in delivering our lectures or studios or practicals that we hold in school. And even in the model that UN has proposed for disruptive education, that bit is missing. But once, probably, if that gets added, the whole loop will get completed, and a new model will turn up to educate in a pandemic situation like this what disruptive education could be by this one missing information. So thank you so much for adding that piece. And moving from that mental well-being, because we are in that state, I'm trying to connect all the dots together, because we are in that state of unhappiness perhaps, and our consumption, which Chitra really talked about elaborately, consumption is either declining or either it's increasing. So when it comes to an architect, when we are looking at projects, within those projects there are, Chitra mentioned about 3 R's: reduce, recycle, and reduce, recycle, and reduce in that sense where reuse in that sense where it also leads to an upcycling effect. So do you think if we include these three or four criteria into building projects and beyond, will it affect the consumption and production within the construction industry?
Are you asking?
Is that question?
Yeah,
that question is for Chitra?
The question is yes. The question is for Chitra. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it works because what we are seeing globally in terms of resources now, data is there, how much bauxite is available or how much steel is available and different materials available, and which you can really find and decide on what you want to use. And also you can decide on the use in terms of what William McDonough calls in cradle to cradle as technical or as agricultural nutrient. And with that clarity in mind, you still have a lot of material, so you can still enjoy making a building, but you got to follow some of that discipline in the design. And well, like Vibhuti said, there's so much more to be thinking in terms of collaborative designs. And so the whole paradigm of architectural teaching should really bring in various other professionals and academics into the schema. That would help a great deal. I think these numbers are important. Students have to know the numbers before they design. And that is a major change which has to go through. And like architecture, education and architecture itself has gone through many different changes. And still we are saying architecture is being for the privileged, even the student in terms. You know, I hear people eulogizing cycling and walking, but still 50% of Indians cycle or walk in our cities. And that's a huge number, okay? It's not something that we don't do. It's us probably going gaga about I'm cycling or walking, but otherwise 50% do, and 50% are mostly outside, or more are mostly outside. I think 90% are mostly outside. This is only in India, the population, even 10% is a huge number. It's a country in many cases, okay? So like Gaurav says, I think we're still talking in the echo chambers, and we from the echo chambers have to get out.
Yeah.
And know about the numbers. I think our pandemic, for me, Vibhuti, most important was to see the migrant laborers out in the city. And you realize how our cities depend so much on it, on these supports.
I think Chitra lost the connection.
Chitra can't hear you.
I think Chitra lost the connection.
She's still the participant. She's on the participant list, which means there. But,
okay. Okay. I think we'll wait for a minute. If not, then we'll move on to the next question. Next round of discussion.
Now she's dropped. Yeah.
Okay. I think we'll move on. And once she comes back, I'll ask her again. Because her calculation really showcased what less is more, and how the in-home development really can work place. But the idea of doing something at a small scale versus a large scale is where the difference lies. So maybe once she joins in, I'll ask that. But coming from Chitra's point of
she's back.
Yeah, she's back. She's back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. So I think you are spot on with the numbers that each and every one of us should know the numbers. And my next question was related with numbers, because your calculations really showed a and proved that less is more. And with that, the in-home development really works. But moving from small scale to large scale, in a situation like this where the interaction is much lesser than what it used to be, I feel there is certain gap in that sense. And will it affect, moving from small scale to large scale, will it really affect the consumption and production within the construction industry again?
See, the whole idea of turning an idea into a small scale itself is wrong. Because the idea itself says this is the number needed. It's not saying it's needed only for small scale. This is the number needed for a person. So that you can multiply it by billions. It doesn't make any difference. So that has to be very clear. So we tend to all the time look at this. But let's look at the way resources are consumed when you're talking about this large scales. And also, let's again see the numbers of NPA in our cities. Places which are just redundant and being there. We have built, the developers build because they can keep making profit rather than really for the need of it. So this is a total difference. Thinking which is also required, and that only the institutes can do. What I find very interesting in this digital teaching has been that the scale of being able to give this message out, which you can't do in a classroom alone, probably 30 students.
Correct.
Right now you can talk to 300 in 10 sessions and without that much of physical movement. Yeah. So that way, well, applaud whatever resources it takes, Gaurav, for the digital technology. Yeah? But if each teacher is connected to a smaller number of students, which I've been doing, I'm teaching and I have only 11 students, Vibhuti, we understand then their mental issues and you can talk to them a lot more. When I was teaching for 40 students, it was so difficult to even remember names. So how do we connect? With digital, that's a possibility that you can connect to smaller numbers and mentor them better. So we need to reimagine education. We need to reimagine the way we need in the world. We haven't had this kind of a situation before. Okay, when we had this kind of a situation in Europe, they all migrated all over and took resources from it. Now we know this finite Earth. We cannot migrate to Mars or Moon or wherever everybody is planning to take us. It will be again the privileged few, but the rest will be here. And how do we work according to what's in the country, in the world? And so I think the global perspective helps. So we need to learn the universal, but we have to be very local. So we just call it glocal because everything then works here. Okay, I'm sorry if I can take half a minute more. Is that
Sure.
Our learning from, in fact, construction as well as water happened in our house. So it's very small scale. But now, talking about million wells in Bangalore, we have done only 1/10 of it. So we have done 1 lakh. But already you can see the difference going to the water table in parts of Bangalore. And then treating the wastewater, and now it's going to 100 kilometers away and filling up tanks. So the whole paradigm shift, and then reuse of water for what purpose, all that is coming together because we're learning from the small and we're able to experiment and do things in the small. Now in Bangalore, there might be about 10,000 earth buildings. We're not talking, we as Indians, we don't talk that how great we are, We don't tell this is the city with the largest number of earth buildings. Do we talk about it in India at all? That India has a city with the largest amount of, let's say, ecological buildings, largest number of solar water heaters is in Bangalore. We need it, so it's there. So we have to start talking about India more in our teaching. We have to show our own examples. Get the numbers of India more into our teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the discussion Gaurav, like in his presentation, like really pressed on the fact that Asian continent and African continent has the most sustainable development design strategies, and we should not rely on the West. And then you have really shown through your project that it is possible, and we have kind of lost that traditional knowledge, and we should regain it in our through our education systems. So that's a very relevant point, and I think that kind of puts a plug on that gap that we are talking about. So thanks Chitra for that valuable point. Moving on, I would like to combine what Gaurav and Ajit spoke today, because Gaurav, on one side, he was on hard facts. He was totally on the percentages and numbers and what's the efficiency and what's the offset. And he was totally brutal on the fact that this is what you are losing on. Whereas Ajit was talking about policy development gaps. He was talking about entrepreneurship. So how can we, both together or individually, independently can answer this? How can we bridge this gap of what the hard fact is and where we are losing, and how we can implement this in a policy gap that Ajit was talking about? Gaurav, you want to highlight that first?
Himanshu, I want to start by clarifying something, and it came up when Gaurang mentioned that, oh yes, of course, there's been hegemony, there's been colonization. Hegemony has nothing to do with colonization. Hegemony is what Chitra highlighted, that 50% of India bicycles, but we are not looking at that 50%. We are looking at the people who, for instance, Aduraj was saying, are doing, like 60 kilometers, 70 kilometers a day. I have been cycling in Delhi since 1997. And I'm not a Sunday cyclist. I'm an everyday cyclist. I have cycled ridiculously large distances with people who bicycle on an everyday basis from Delhi to Faridabad and back for livelihoods. And at one point of time, we had tried to float a project with Ernst & Young to, to just give reflective vests to those people who are everyday cyclists with the message saying, I breathe your stale air. Just to let people know that these are the guys who are actually kind of offsetting the carbon that is being exhausted out by the cars. So hegemony is not the whole colonial mindset. Hegemony is real-time domination right now, which we aren't even aware is dominating us. So it's not hegemony if you are aware of it, number one. It is hegemony only when you are not aware of it. And I think in our policy initiatives, there's something that Gaurang highlighted, which is very crucial, I feel. Having been in TERI for 6 years, I have friends like Divya and another friend of mine, an ex-SPA, who now works for the Rocky Mountain Institute, who told me that the Indian national transport policy has been developed by people from the car industry. Now, that's not surprising, because the national car policy of the United States of America was also developed by the car industry. For example, what gave the rights to the Ford Foundation to design future cities? Where was the connection? Did they have urban designers? Did they have architects? No, they didn't. But they somehow declared themselves, people who can do the future exhibition back in the early 1900s in the US. So I think first and foremost is to get present. Realize that we are being hegemonized. We need to look at our own cities in new ways and to look at our settlements. I wouldn't call them cities. In new ways. So something again that Gaurang had highlighted, which was to learn from the crisis. Now, I would like to learn from how this crisis was handled by villages, because I have a lot of vested interest in the villages. I have people who work in the villages, and I have been able to send students of architecture after finishing architecture back to the villages. So the fact that architects can't solve the meta issue is not true, because I know that architects have gone to the village to start entrepreneurial ventures. The villagers, very interestingly, just cordoned off their village. And the only one thing that I got from 4 villages that we are working with through the pandemic, also we were in touch with these people. They said, हमने क्या किया ना, हमने बोला भैया जो दिल्ली से आता है ना उसको बाहर रखना, या जो मुंबई से आता है ना उसको बाहर रखना. And because these village clusters are community based, They are age old. Everybody knows each other. Eyes on the street is a default for them. They keep an eye on each other's children, keep an eye on each other. It works as such a beautiful, sustainable model. And incidentally, what happened in Delhi is the same thing, that gated communities and streets started just closing their gates and making sure that anybody who comes from outside had to be filtered. Now, I don't think we need architectural interventions here. I'm sorry. Architects are not the be all and end all of all this. It is just the fact that the architect to start with is a citizen. And if we can start looking at ourselves from the fact that as citizens, there are some systems that work outside the domain of architecture, and to acknowledge the fact that when we talk about villages, they do grow organically, and the kind of planning that they have is nature-centric. How can we learn from that? How can we, for example, today we all know Amit Sarma's work in space syntax. He teaches at Sushant as well. That space syntax has been able to empirically prove that local settlements that grew organically are more socially sustainable, ergo more energy efficient as well. Now, why can't we look at those patterns that already work? When we start looking at those patterns that already work, the policy initiatives stop being driven by international exams. Then the policy initiatives are very easy to implement, because we are not asking people to say, "Ek kaam karo na, wo karo jo Singapore kar raha hai ya jo Curitiba kar raha hai." No, Curitiba was a great example 40 years back. Then for 30 years, they had a long gap where those old 40-year slides were being shown to the world as a great case study. And now, like Gaurav rightly identified, over the past 10 years, due to good leadership, it has come back to a good model of sustainability. I know this because I had colleagues in Terry who traveled to Curitiba and said that it doesn't work the way we have been made to show in the excellent case studies, quote unquote. तो हमारे को ये देखना है कि हमारे देश के लिए क्या काम कर रहा है already. And Chitra has beautifully pointed it out, that all the migrant labor came out. We suddenly realized that these people were hidden under the carpet, hidden in dark corners of the city. And now suddenly they were walking barefoot from the city back to their villages. And that's what the city needs. How can we make sure that we can support them to transition back to their villages and to have sustainable livelihoods? So again, your question was on policy, on bridging the gap, and how to implement these policies. My submission is that the first thing we need to look at, for instance, in a direct conversation with the Ministry of Skills, a very senior person in the Ministry of Skills, I asked them, how many of the Skill India programs that you're running are correlated to sustainable livelihoods? Can you guess their answer? Zero. I said, how many of your skills that you're talking about will be relevant 20 years from now? The answer, we don't know. Zero. So I think if I just look at, my pain point is that how do I amplify the voices of what Vibhuti was saying, of what Chitra was saying? How do I amplify these voices so that the voices that presume कि हमारे को कुछ नहीं पता, हमको international collaboration से ही सही होगा जो होगा हमारे, वो अरे यार नहीं, हमारे पास excellent case studies हैं इंडिया में, बहुत बेहतरीन case studies हैं, लेकिन उनको हम acknowledge कैसे करें? ये कैसे बोलें कि हाँ ये ठीक है? And include that as a policy directive rather than what we are trying to do, unfortunately, today. And Dr. Ajit very rightly pointed out कि वो NAPCC में तो I was part of the National Habitat Mission when we developed the Habitat Mission under the National Action Plan on Climate Change. But the good news is that the NDC that he was talking about declared globally that Griha is India's national rating system and can make buildings that are naturally ventilated. अब वो ऐसी डिक्लेरेशन दो ना इंडिया में जहां पे दुनिया बोले कि हाँ यार ऐसे भी पॉसिबल है. मेरे को एयर कंडीशनिंग में एफिशिएंसी लाने की जरूरत नहीं है, मैं एयर कंडीशनिंग के बगैर भी बिल्डिंग बना सकता हूँ. हाउ कैन आई डू दैट? Right?
And it existed and before.
Yeah, it's not something that's dated. I have a very this bad feeling that a lot of Indian people tend to think that our practices were dated. No. It's like what Gaurav pointed out about Varanasi. It is the longest continuously inhabited city on the planet. And the streets are bhul bhulaiya for us, not for the people who live there. It would be very interesting to work with those people and ask them, how do you navigate through these bhul bhulaiya streets and what are your interpretations of landmarks? And you would get a richness and a complexity that the West cannot comprehend.
Absolutely.
And I think that is our gift to the world. we can gift richness, complexity, very complex social frameworks, very complex interdependencies. And I think Sushant, with that initiative of interdisciplinary learning, had kind of touched upon it and started with it. And I think it's the blurring of the lines. When Chitra is talking, she's not talking architecture. She's talking about sustainable agriculture. She's talking about sustainable resource management. She's talking about sustainable rejuvenation of water at the city level and architecture. Then policy implementation becomes a breeze. Policy implementation is not this task that we have to do. Damn, I can talk about. I'm sorry, but there are these things that are just so overlapping that I have to highlight the fact that
true.
No, it's systemically.
No, Gaurav, it's very relevant. I think citizens or the leaders are not owning it, and because of that lack of ownership, that idea of implementing something good for the citizen is not coming out.
And I want to highlight something here, Himanshu. I'm sorry, just one last 30 seconds.
Sure.
That the fact Chitra touched upon this, and we've had to change the name of our project to bring about this. We don't call our project Swaraj anymore, believe it or not, because Indian people in schools don't like it. Our project is now called the Pride Project. That people understand. We are missing pride. We are lacking pride. Yeah. But Swaraj, it's too Hindu a term, it's too dominated. I use saffron. I'm like, dude, it was started by Mahatma Gandhi, who was the least saffron of leaders of the world. So I don't understand, But this aspect, the fact that we are not proud of us being Indian. Very frankly, we are proud if we speak good English, if we drive a nice car, if we have a posh house where we're living. And that really doesn't define, I wouldn't say sustainable India, but it doesn't define sustainability today. So I think it's a great opportunity to reassess what it means even to be successful as an Indian. And then go about doing whatever we want to do. Thanks. Sorry.
Ajit, what are your views, perspective on this?
Great. No, I really enjoyed listening to all these, these ideas and thoughts, and it has enriched me a lot. And the kind of fire Gaurav was bringing into this discussion, I think he kept it really strong. So, building on what he said, yes, we certainly have to be mindful of our realities are different, and we have to create policy solutions which will help our society to move forward instead of importing something. Of course, we have to be mindful of what is happening elsewhere, because climate change is not just our problem, it's not just our reality, it's happening everywhere. But how do we respond to that depends upon the word that I used earlier, is the biosocial system that we have. It's different from what is Europe. It's different from what is in USA. It is different from what is in another country. So we have to kind of understand that, and that's where actually the role of higher education institutions such as Sushant, where this interdisciplinary engagement, building trust between three different disciplines within the school, and then now we are willing to tell to the world, look, we as academics who are teaching planning, architecture and design, we trust each other, respect, regard, and we work together. And seeing this, the next generation of architects, planners and designers are evolving. And then we go to the world and tell, look, we together are able to create something which will help your society be better, which will make your places better. So those kind of engagement projects we do through urban design, planning and other studios, and then kind of empower. So the Royal Town Planning Institute started the Planning Aid. So working with the communities to help them to create their own vision. We should have all these kind of things, maybe citizen engagement initiative, much more profoundly and purposefully. It should not be just a studio project where students get some marks, faculty get some brownie point. No, something which is very profound, which is transformative. And at the end of that process, we should be able to showcase some gain. And if we start building these blocks together, the national policy architecture is going to respond. We don't have to constantly go and nudge them, constantly knock on their door. They will come to us. They will see the value. Now, the very fact that each of these panelists who are talking about their own independent work and the impact it created, it simply tells that we have to work more closely within these disciplines, which is the Sushant initiative, which Vibhuti was mentioning. And then we have to also engage with other academic institutions. So I would always believe we have to create that right ecosystem. We can't again survive, flourish, progress neither as an individual alone nor as an institution alone. So get other planning and architecture schools to work together, create those coalitions, and then engage with policy institutions. Because Niti Aayog is only one. Niti Aayog will need hundreds and thousands of institutions like ours to work with them. Convince them that we have a real knowledge and thinking which you will require. If you talk about cooperative federalism, if you talk about bringing a change which the localization of SDG can happen, we are going to work with you in communities and cities, and we are going to be your ambassadors for change. So work with us. So that argument has to be profound and impactful, and that can happen only when, again, putting back the idea that Professor Sachdev introduces, the idea of trust. I think that will transform. Trust deficit is the issue today. Nobody trusts each other. And I can tell you from planning discourses, there is a very, very powerful argument coming from the Western cities that planners are not trusted. And we know what is happening in Indian context. There's no trust on planner. Whatever is produced, nobody values it. Neither his own boss, nor the political leadership, nor the citizens. So I think we have to relook our value system and engage continuously whether there is a quick change or if the change is going to be eventually happening. And I think that if we do that, there will be responses and positive responses from the policy institutions, because they are one among us. Whether it is politician or bureaucrat, they live in the city, they live in the community. The change cannot be ignored. So I do believe we really kind of need to go ahead in this manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ajit. And I think you pointed out a very relevant point of involving and rehashing our value systems and engaging everyone to trust each other. And that leads to the very first point that I mentioned in at the beginning of this discourse, where Dr. Vibhuti said and mentioned about involving youth and training them and honing their skills and so that they can impart their expertise and knowledge in the society, and simultaneously take this line of path from curing to caring and becomes even more sensitive towards the development that a holistic sustainable development is achieved. So taking that from your discourse and what Gaurav said, that Gaurav was discussing about rich versus poor, but there is one important and significant, at least in the Indian context, one significant aspect is the status, is the aspiration. So moving from rich to aspirations or status to poor, how would it really push the ecological risk, Dr. Ajit? Would you think that these three things together, if they come and the aspiration is even more higher, do you think that climate change will be even more impacted? As Dr. Divya Dutt was mentioning about 3.5 degrees, is it going to go beyond that and increase the ecological risk? What are your takes on that?
Okay, the risk is certainly increasing, but I think we have to believe in our collective intelligence, and humanity has, we have evolved through various shocks and risks over a period of over the generation. So there are approaches which has been tried, and the predominance, the blue-green infrastructure is now gaining in more, at least in the urban planning discourse. Of course, Gaurav mentioned that also related to the need for attending biophilia, but there are bigger implications to that. That how do you keep our keep the urban environment more balanced, more cool, more able to absorb different, excess flood water, keep the temperature balanced, all those things. So I think we are eventually realizing that we kind of created concrete spaces and places in abundance. We have eliminated all those natural environment, and we are trying to bring back them in smaller environments or in bigger manner, looking at landscape approach in planning, not just planation, but rather the planning should be mindful of the landscape rather than just pieces of land. So these kind of arguments within my own discipline and what I keep hearing and seeing from some of the latest discourses makes me feel that the threat, however strong it is, I think as humanity will outgrow it. This is my response. Of course, we will have to go through the shock waves which is coming through the frequenting of epidemics or maybe another pandemic. We do not know. So there are such challenges, but I think it is going to make us stronger, and it is going to give us more. I mean, the current pandemic which we are experiencing. I mean, I had no clue how we would have navigated through the last 8-9 months. Didn't have any idea whether one would have been as good and beautiful the world as it is today. But the very fact, all of us managed to keep ourselves excited, motivated, and keep doing our bit. It is an assurance of human spirit, and I think we will be able to find. And there is enough scientific evidence that by establishing these norms and bringing these changes in our societies, in our communities, in our cities, we will be able to. So the evidences that architect Chitra Vishwanath brought from her own work, and use of the material which are around us in our building system, in our cities and communities, I think it's going to give us a lot of possibilities. I will fall short of knowledge on that aspect, so I will not get into that. But I am quite confident we'll be able to outgrow this.
No, absolutely. I think many relevant points have been discussed to actually put these ideas into action, and then moving from the countrywide action plan to actually reordering our priorities, which Gaurav presented in his presentation. I like the idea where he mentioned, is city as a bomb or city as an opportunity? I think it's a very important and literally a bomb for us to realize that, because no one had really thought or seen city as a bomb. People always saw city as an opportunity. And with that aspect, city is a bomb, and certainly in this situation of COVID and pandemic issue, where cities are more and more realized, Gaurav, that it should be more compact, it should be more walkable. But now with this social distancing new norm coming into place because of the pandemic, do you think there will be a broader rule of engagement in city development for the future?
So it's a good question. I think, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think it should be a reactive process, but rather a more kind of longer term thought process. The pandemic is a blip in the larger existence of humanity. We had flu earlier, not to kind of disregard the loss of life or economic impact. Or in places like India, the kind of reverse migration and all of that kind of underbelly that we didn't really know about. We knew about it, but we kind of just pushed it under the mattress, like we say. But I think putting all those factors aside, social distancing it can't prevail. I mean, we'll as humans will continue to want to be seen, engage with each other, and open spaces have proven to be necessary in that form of engagement. Whether we do it with a mask or without a mask is what's going to change potentially. But we're going to do it in one form or the other. And finally, that mask will go away as well. So we can't design a city for the pandemic per se. But if we look at the fundamentals, like I said, of creating more open space, of making it more walkable, of making it more compact, of creating the opportunities for the human spirit to be celebrated in a city, all of those macro level aspects, they will prevail. And when I spoke about cycling or other things which might be becoming a fad in the West, and like Chitra said, it happens already in India. And that's exactly what I was saying. It happened in Shanghai and they've taken it away. We need to learn from that and not take it away. And I love what you said, like if someone was the West saying like, I'm smoking, you're stay there, and we need to create that awareness. It should not be recreational. It should be part of the fabric of how you live. When you go to work in it, you choose to do that. You choose to stay closer to where you work then because of that. So you don't want to live, work, and commute in that American format of suburbia, which is what we're aping today in our cities. That's exactly the point, that there's so much history within India. There's so much history within Asia, all of Asia. I won't even say India, and China, Asia, Vietnam, all these places. Cities have been rich, rich fabrics, rich tapestry of cultural zones of engagement, walkability, cycling, the zero edge lot, engagement at all levels. I don't know why we suddenly started fragmenting it. And I have something to share over here. When I was at one time working in the US with HOK, and we were doing a project in China, and we went to the Chinese city in Shenzhen, and suddenly it was the presentation, it was a mayor, and it was about 60 other people in the room. And we had this whole idea of, cycle back, that was another presentation. This was Shanghai when I went with Richard Cricken. And for Xinjiang with SOM and Stephen Townsend, we were looking at doing a very kind of small scale. And the mayor and everyone after we presented said, we already have this. We didn't call you from the US to give us this. We actually want tall towers and glass skyscrapers. All the stuff that you do in the US, we can do this on our own. We didn't hire you for that. So we were like I was totally puzzled. I was like, well, because this is what the climate, the environment, and the need is. And you want this. And then finally, what does a company like SOM do? In Xinjiang, they managed to go push ahead because of certain people who, but in a lot of other places, what do? The client wants a square hat, even though the round hat fits them better. So it's a challenge. As a professional, as a responsible professional, what you do is, I always say, the client wants a square hat, start with the square hat, slowly shape it to the round that it needs. But if you go there and say no, so they'll get someone else to build the square hat.
True.
So it's about, slowly, incrementally, kind of fighting these battles slowly, one step at a time, one miracle at a time. Some of you have the luxury, like Chitra, I say it's a luxury to you, Chitra, to do what you're doing, although I'm sure you have your challenges. For me, I tried so hard in projects where it's impossible in this part of the world. The tendering processes, the construction processes, when you do something simple, the contractors, they come back with a much higher price because they don't know how to do it. So the client says, oh, no, we can't do it. So we just tried to do a project in Maldives where we were trying to do, I wanted to try and get development alternatives and everyone else involved and do it as a low-cost thing. It was supposed to be for staff housing and campus. Finally, the tendering and the construction process and everything else prevailed, and they wanted to do prefab with aluminum and 2x4s and whatever else, and it was just, finally I gave up. I had no choice but to give up. I tried it. I tried to battle it. So it's context. It's context, country, culture, and how and where you can do what you want to do.
Thanks, Gaurav. Because in this fight between complexity and urban sprawl, you did mention one thing about the green spaces, where cities like Bombay, even Bangalore, I would say, they're all losing out their green spaces, and these green spaces, So in that sense, where we are losing, how do we cope up? Because then, if you are losing more and more green spaces, the communication between people is going to be not 6 feet, but probably just 2 feet or 3 feet. So the idea of having more and more green spaces to avert social distancing, would that really bring in that kind of culture amongst the planners as well as the architects, and it's a triggering point that now that we have social distancing, we should have more and more open spaces so that people are talking to each other more from a distance rather than close. Does it push or does it trigger?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, look, I think open space is a fundamental right and for our health and existence.
Okay.
So I don't think again the pandemic and the social distancing should drive that. You can use that as an opportunity to drive that further, sure.
Yeah.
But really, honestly, I think, and it's about actually increasing the space. So, like Gaurav was saying earlier, that we have so many examples in India. We have like betareen case studies. Why should we look to the West? I would say no. You should look to every part of the world. You should not insulate yourself in any one space, wherever you are. Because good examples are good examples, doesn't matter what part of the world they come.
Correct.
And Singapore, as Disney-ish as it may seem, or whatever else, and it has its own issue. But the one thing they've done extremely successfully is in building a very planned, livable city. They've put the policies into place for that. They've put the frameworks into place for that. They've put the government has put in the money behind it and all of it. It has its failings, of course. It's a young country and it's a country state. It has its challenges, but they've increased green space, usable green space. Not necessarily forested, but they've increased usable green space and access to it. They've created park connectors. Now you can cycle across the entire city without actually coming into contact with a vehicle. You can walk in parks. Parks have been connected. They're continuing to connect the parks. So they're continuing to make them accessible straight from places, from workplaces, from home, from wherever else. So that has to happen at the city level. We can't just talk. I mean, the city planners and the city policy makers have to say it has to be done. I mean, where it can be done, like we've had isolated examples. Delhi had done whatever 20 years back, reclaiming a nala and doing it fantastic. But why haven't we had hundreds of those done? And why haven't we had open space connected throughout? That is the point. That it hasn't been followed through. It's been sporadic at the planning level in the city.
True. Because that's very pertinent to what Adhiraj presented in his presentation. He did mention about this concept of Chai Pe Charcha, which brings people together in a space and then does give a sense of inclusivity, safety, resilience, as well as sustainability that he talked about. So, Adhiraj, what would you like to, whatever Gaurav just said right now, what would you like to comment on that? Whether it's, because you also talk about disperse and segregate multifunctional spaces, mini apartments, and reclaim the outdoor spaces, right? So, but in a much more unit-wide space compared to what the urban spaces would be. So what is your idea and take on that?
So from what my experience have been is, we have always, when I was in Lotus and right now I am doing my own thing also, I have just been responding to the context wherever I am building, whether it be a state, any state. So what all local materials we have, what kind of local artisans we are working with. Because as an architect, I would feel that, yes, I know everything, but I don't. The local artisans know over there what they have and what they can achieve by the local materials. So India's history, I'm just talking about the Indian context because I have just designed in India. Because India as a context, it has so much craft and it has so much of I think so history that we have already in the past days only, we were much more technologically ahead of the West. If we just adapt to the things just as mere Hawa Mahal, our jalis, the kind of stones that we are using, the kind of passive cooling methods that we were using, Baulis, an amazing example of passive cooling, using earth as a heat sink, because there were no water wells in Rajasthan. So all of these things, they were just adapted from India. Right now, I am just in process of I'll just take an example. In process of doing a small little hotel restaurant in Goa, so we are just talking to the clients to go natural, to go using bamboo as a material, using bamboo as a sustainable material. If Bali can do it, so just taking Indonesia, I just went to Indonesia, saw their culture. It's just like India. They have so much of cultural heritage, and that is what we need to enhance and show it to the world, that yes, we have all of these things which are existing within ourselves and we have to express it.
Because all these things were what you presented, and you did mention this resilience achieved through environmental protection. That was a very key point that you mentioned, and then responding to the context at that point of time, and all these two things together when you bring up, I think that's where you can talk about inclusivity, safety, resilience, as well as sustainability. Do you agree on that fact and note that resilience achieved through environmental protection will lead to inclusivity, safety, resilience, and sustainability?
Definitely, because we need design that accepts and celebrates context, making locally relevant choices that helps to sustain the local economy and environment. Just taking an example of imagining urban scapes, designing for people and not just vehicles, public spaces which are inclusive and making citizens feel safe and part of home, and cozy multifunctional spaces where one can choose to be alone without feeling lonely. I would just like to share one example, if you may. This is
Sure.
a picture. Just a second. Oh my God, I have to add an extension. Okay.
But if you can just describe it.
So basically, it was an example of Rajrival having done a migration community. So it's series of open courtyards. People within their houses, they are not feeling lonely. They are just connecting with each other with series of semi-open and open spaces. So this kind of inclusivity, where people feel more inclusive, where people feel safe in that environment, we need to design these kind of spaces rather than just gated communities, which is off from the city.
Okay. I think
Gaurav also.
Yeah, Dheeraj, please.
Yeah, and how Gaurav sir also, this is the image, if everyone can see this. So this is that image which I am talking about. So how each and every person in this community is being so inclusive with series of semi-open and open courtyards, all of these kind of feeling, how Singapore is right now connecting each and every park with the offices. So this is how the urban safety, the inclusivity, and the resilience of the city will come, and in turn sustainability.
All right. Thanks, Adhiraj. And I think major points were highlighted in this discourse and this. Yeah.
Sorry,
Hello?
I just wanted to add one thing to that. Sorry,
Sure.
can you hear me? I just wanted to add
Yes,
that,
yes.
from macro to micro level in terms of sustainability, really establishing a toolkit is what I feel. And of course, it's a start. For a city level, the toolkit is going to be massive. It's a massive toolbox because it's so many layers in a city. But, starting with a few and slowly implementing one by one is what I think is, there's some value in that. And I really loved, I think I was sat in on the jury at Shaurya, one of the students at SSAA.
Yes.
He's done a very,
Yes.
very interesting intervention at urban square level pocket, but how it's macro to micro. And that kind of intervention is what I think is required in pockets of the city, besides at a larger framework using a toolkit to address all these sustainable, whether they're localized, international best practices. There's no one size solution fits all for sure. So they have
Absolutely.
to be gleaned from the best practices and then applied. That's my last 10 cents. But sorry, I have to run off. I've exceeded.
Sure, sure. And I would just like to thank. I just like to thank everyone because this course opened up so many things, and it leads me back to what Dr. Vibhuti stated, that what is left out in SDG. And I think all the points that we discussed in this panel discussion and through the presentation are the things which are left out in the SDG, and these collectively, if we highlight these points and share it with UN, probably they may incorporate those points and reassess their SDGs for the next target. So thank you all, thank you each one of you for sparing your time, and I really regret and apologize for the overshooting of the time, but thank you so much for sparing time from your busy schedule and making this a successful event, and I really enjoyed the discussion as well as the presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.